Very good afternoon to the international conference on coping with the world perspectives from Buddhism and Pragmatist Philosophy. This is the second day, academic session sixth. Now we have four speakers. Now I would like to request the chairperson of this session, Professor Anand Mishra sir, who is the former head of this department. Please have your seat on the dais. Now the first speaker, Rakesh Kumar Singh. May I request him to have your seat on the dais? Second speaker, Biplav Winker. I'm requesting you to have your seat on the dais. Next speaker, Mansi Hess. Please have your seat on the dais. Now we have another speaker, Dr. Niti Singh. Please have your seat on the dais. Here. Yes. At the very outset of this session, we'd like to felicitate our chairperson as well as speakers with a memento. Now, I can request to Saili, who is the research scholar of this department, can felicitate to our chairperson with a memento. Please felicitate to Rakesh Kumar Singh sir with memento. Yes. Please felicitate to Biplav Winker with memento. Please felicitate to Mansi Hess with memento. And please felicitate to Dr. Niti Singh with memento. As we all know that this is a very serious and important job, and particularly this academic session of the seminar. Now we have very renowned professor, senior professor, who is going to preside of this session. We all know that he is the former HOD of this department, and he is so renowned in particular area of the philosophy, as we all know, Advaita Vedanta philosophy, particularly Shankaracharya's, as well as continental in some extension to Satrij philosophy, and he has contributed a lot and some substantial contributions, like we can say Advaita Vedanta philosophy, Mahayana Buddhism philosophy, phenomenology, consciousness studies, and he has written very important books, but I can just take the name of two important one. शास्त्र एंड शंकराचार्य के दर्शन में मानवी 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 दर्शन, and he has presented several papers in several international and national conferences as well as seminars, and he has published so many articles in reputed national and international journals. So, welcome you, sir, to this session for presiding the academic session. Now we can introduce our speaker, Rakesh Kumar Singh, sir, who is an assistant professor at Zakir Hussain College, DU. He pursued his MA in philosophy from DU. He earned his MPhil PhD in philosophy from JNU. His expertise is continental philosophy. He has taught at JNU and MIT and Allied Science and several other colleges of DU. Thank you so much, sir, for having an important paper here. Secondly, we can introduce the speaker, Biplov Winker. He is an important professor and assistant professor of philosophy at BK Birla College, Kollam, and he's also the head and assistant professor, Department of Philosophy, Birla Kollam College, and his PhD from Mumbai University. The third speaker, Man Sives, who is an assistant professor of philosophy at Manipal University, Jaipur. She pursued his PhD degree from University of Lucknow in 2017 and has been a junior research fellow under the ICPR research program. He is assistant professor. She was assistant at University of Lucknow for 3 months. Her interest areas is metaphysics and epistemology, as well as history of Western philosophy. Of course, in some extension to philosophy of language, philosophy of mind, and Indian philosophy. She was the recipient of prestigious ICPR foreign travel grants for presenting a research paper at the Australian Postgraduate Philosophy Conference in 2023, which was held at the University of Western Australia. Now, the last speaker is Dr. Niti Singh, who is presently working as an assistant professor in this department. He has done her PhD in applied philosophy with special reference to administrative philosophy from the University of Allahabad. She has published more than 1 dozen of research papers related to her research areas and also co-author of a book, Introduction, Introductory Principle of Logic. Seeing things into categories, she edited 2 volumes of the departmental journals, Anikhike. Now, I can welcome to all of the audience from online and offline. Now we'll start the presentation by Rakesh Kumar Singh. Sir, please.
Thank you. Thanks to the chair and my greetings to all the esteemed teachers here, Professor Gopal Guru, Professor Gokhleji, Professor Barmaya, and Professor Rakesh Chandra, sir, Professor Biswas, and all my colleagues here, my greetings to Dr. Rahul, Dr. Saurav, and Dr. Prashant, all these guys here, and very good afternoon to all the students and friends. This is Banaras, Hindu University, BHU, Banaras. When I come to this place, I remember that this has been the place of contemplation, contemplation of truth, meaning, and reality in different ways. And from the time immemorial, this is going on in different ways. We know there are two different sects here, orthodox and heterodox. And the approach you find different. One side there is Purna, everything is there. And another side there is Sunya, nothing is there. And people have worked on this area that sometimes there's a big difference, sometimes there's a subtle difference, but this area is very important. Another thing is that we find in both this towards both these areas, and beautiful thing is that there is theory of negation. Negation becomes the methodology. Neti, neti, Prashanga method, and different things. Denial. In denial, you find meaning. One side it is substantial, the truth is substantial, another side it is non-substantial. So one thing is this, and today my job is to concentrate on and to elaborate the concept of shunyata, the emptiness, through the line of some pioneers of continental philosophy, Martin Heidegger, and I will bring a little bit of Richard Rorty. One thing is this, and I will also would like to say that when I came here, I also like to give some greetings to the professor of BHU some time back, long time back, Professor J.L. Mehta. But J.L. Mehta is very important. I have mentioned his name many times at different places. And he was here in BHU and he wrote one book on Martin Heidegger. And here, perhaps in India, he was not taken very seriously, but Harvard invited him to join there on the basis of his work. And J.L. Mohanty has written introduction of his book, and it is a beautiful introduction if you go through. And Arendt is mentioning also that what had some great things about J.L. Mehta. And now I will come to the topic of this shunyata. And sunyata, you find different words for this. White, you find emptiness, find nothingness. And when we come to nothingness, the English translation nothingness is very important, very, very uh, well discussed, well written. And I also remember one instance from my very engaged time in JNU, and it was with Professor Gopal Guru. There was some discuss in the Vice Chancellor office. He was there. He asked me, "What is nothingness?" If you remember, sir. And nothingness, kya hawa mein hai? He was asking me. Means to know what. So then I answered him, and when some time outside in JNU campus, because there's culture of discussion, asking, and there is very friendly environment. So sir also asked, I was trying to narrate this thing that no, nothingness is different in different philosophers. So I will like to bring it here also. Nothingness in the case of Sartre is different. Nothingness in the case of Heidegger is different. Nothingness in the case of Nietzsche is different. Nothingness in the case of Buddha will certainly come to this thing. And then I will come to the main line, nothing, nothings. And before I come to that main line, which I would like to start from Rudolf Carnap's article, Elimination of Metaphysics. So Sartre's nothingness is something which is aimed for the emergence of, or the achievement of existence. It talks of nothingness of the consciousness of nothingness. consciousness of nothingness. Sartre says a man is not what he is, a man is what he is not. And there is lack, there is dukkha. But the biggest problem is that people are not aware that there is dukkha. You have problem, you are in suppose exploitation, but you don't know they are in exploitation. Then who will make you to come out of exploitation? The biggest problem is this. And that's what Sartre says. To be aware of that nothingness, that lack, and from that the possibility to be emerged and you will come out of this. And when I say that there is facticity, there is experience of pain, humiliation, but there's also a scope for emancipation because man is the possibility. This is line by Martin Heidegger. So Sartre says this. In Nietzsche, there is nihilistic approach taken from his mentor Schopenhauer, but he turns towards the active nihilism from passive nihilism, the attempt to make meaning. But I am just bringing this line. I'm coming to Martin Heidegger. When Heidegger says nothing, nothings, he is writing this, explaining this, and in such a way that he wrote that book, Being and Time, which is, people say, scholars say of the world, this is the best book of the, this is most read, most best book of the 20th century. And then he, after that, he writes again Time and Being, on Time and Being. He writes, and of Philosophy and Task of Theatre. And before I come to speak on this nothing, nothings, I will come to that article by Rudolf Carnap, logical positivist. He writes, this is again world famous article, Elimination of Metaphysics. In Elimination of Metaphysics, he is talking about truth. And he is in favor of external verification. We see later that in phenomenology, the inner experiential domain, external verification. And then in that article, it is there that this line he brings from Martin Heidegger. From that I will start. Nothing, nothings. This line he writes in that article. And he says that, what is this? This is meaningless. On his very path of positivism, he says it is meaningless. And again, I will bring one instance of reading group from JNU. Nirmala Chakrabarti was there. Nirmala Chakrabarti, he is this time Vice Chancellor at Calcutta University there. Presidency perhaps. He told us that, sharing his experience of different, that Wittgenstein was there in one meeting in discussion when positivists were making a sense of the truth. Wittgenstein said, when they were saying this is meaningless, Wittgenstein said, this is not meaningless. He had written Tractatus, Logico Philosophicus, and which was inspiration for all the positivists. But that time he was developing thoughts for investigations also, and he had some kind of. So Wittgenstein said it is not meaningless. It is something rather very significant. And Charles Taylor has written parallels in Wittgenstein and Heidegger. I will not go in that direction. Something very significant. Now the question comes, what is that nothing? That is very significant. And that Sein and Zeit, being in time, and scholars of the world know this thing, that John Paul Sartre went to Germany to attend lectures of Martin Heidegger, and then he understood things and wrote Being and Time, perhaps in a different way, Being and Nothingness. And when Sartre couldn't write in that way, he stopped at the level of existence. He couldn't break the door of existence to see the aletheia, the presencing of the truth, that Heidegger wrote again one later to Sartre, that you have not understood this. Later to Sartre, published as Letter to Humanism. Anyway, so nothing, nothings. Now this phrase is already telling you the story, that something is coming out of this nothing. Nothingness is not that way, that emptiness, the talk was going on, and people sometimes say, what is, it is totally empty, then nothing is there. So how will something come out of nothing? No, this nothingness is giving birth to different kind of temporality here. Nothings. And that's why Martin Heidegger appreciates one line by Hegel. Hegel writes in Science of Logic, pure being is pure nothing. Pure being is pure nothing. But then Heidegger criticizes, or he writes against Hegel's development of this line, that pure being is pure nothing, but the metaphysical trapping of the, or the journey of Geist is a problem. That is Heidegger's point of view. But I brought this, that nothing, the journey of nothing, I'm just bringing, my focus will be emptiness, to see the theory of emptiness. This is Hegelian point of view. So there is an attempt to amplify the thing, the path of truth. And in the philosophy of Kant again comes such a revolution and critique of pure reason. But that nominal real again is, you see, that is there, and dichotomy all of you know. And then there is no attempt to get rid of this thing. And you find in Husserl wants to come out of this joy. That no, Nuvena, only this reality is there, but there when Husserl wants to make the sense of truth, so he is going for suspension of the world. Suspension of the world for the time being, because there's again debate here. Is transcendental idealist or realist? Jisam has written, realism is the foundation to Jism's philosophy. Jism's philology. Anyway, but suspension of the time being and reduction is there. But later on, you know that Ponte writes that the biggest lesson of reduction is that reduction is not possible. Heidegger is, so in Husserl you have seen that another concept of Heil and warfare. In this nomadic structure of Heil, you find the meaning is there to be achieved. But Heidegger is saying, no, there is no need for reduction. This life world, the Lebenswelt, and there the meaning is there. And here you can see Pratitsamutpadavad also. Pratitsamutpadavad is what? It is dependent origination. It is talking about the co-existential reality. And there you can see that there is flux, that is momentaneous, and it is not that the world is not there. World is there, but the attempt to essentialize the world is a problem. It is empty. In a classroom in Mr. Delhi, when students asked me to understand this, so I give some examples, basically very simple examples to make very lucid the things. I said, suppose that the concept is there in India that now, suppose Brahmins are intelligent, they're intelligent, but suppose somebody comes from margin, very depressed situation, not intelligent enough to do the things. This essentializations of thing is big mistake. With this Buddhism and the emptiness, you find that no, nothing is there like this. That is no, where things are packed. Things are in its openness. Things are empty. And it depends on the opportunity, on the historicality, on this temporality, how you meet the world, how world comes to you, and then the possibility is infinite. And that's why Heidegger says man is the possibility. Heidegger writes, I give examples because when you find example from your life world, then you understand immediately. And Heidegger says that you are thrown in the world because you take birth in Uttar Pradesh, you take birth in Bengal, you take birth in America, anywhere. It's not your hand. You're thrown. And he comes with the concept of facticity. Facticity is there. What is facticity? Facticity is not factuality, not Russellian propositional thing. That says facticity is something from your that state of being when you start, you try to understand the things. But I will not go in detail of this thing. Where my focus is to bring emptiness here, and there you find that there is fallenness, there is closure, there's anxiety. And then how will you come out of this? So with the understanding of the world, with capital U and a small u, with both epistemological, ontological understanding of the world, because with both presented hand and ready to hand concepts, you come out of this and you make that impossible possible. And that's why the man is the possibility. And I how much time? Only 4 minutes. Anyway, I will try to take 5 minutes. May I request you to more five, 4 plus 5, 9 minutes. And has written a lot, but I will come to Greek terms basically. What I wanted to speak here. He's written essays like Moira, his essay. Greek term Moira means fate. His essay is that logos, Moira is in Parmenides. Fate is on Moira is in Parmenides, and logos is in Heraclitus. And he's written also Anaximander fragments. And Anaximander fragments will find different words. And then I wanted to speak for 10 to 15 minutes, but no, I will confine it to 9 minutes. In 9 minutes. He is using some Greek terms, and with the help of Greek terms, he is trying to make sense of the things. And that is, I like this very much. And I also wrote one article, Heidegger and Anaximander fragments, because this is making things very clear. Prion is one word, Greek term. Katha or prion, one thing. One is photora, Greek term is there. Perhaps I am not, my pronunciation of that Greek term might not be correct. And also there is thesis, fugue, gaben. And these terms are there. And you will find that what he wants to say that no, world is in disclosure. World is that, and from this world is going to the concept capital B being. That being is in nothingness. And a small B being about this worldly things and or something, the foundation of everything which is unfoundational. Grounding everything ungrounded in itself. And from that capital B being, and that is handing over things to you. And the temporality is capital T temporality. It is a right simplicity of some phenomenon. Capital T. And with that, when Dasein is there, human existential mode of being, that being there, and there is no a small T temporality. And with the dwelling of this, there's a possibility of meaning. And Heidegger is explaining this thing with the term of the analytic of Dasein, this ontological things. But the point is that I'm trying to confine these things now. And coming to the moment of present, because in Buddhism, emptiness, there is no momentariness is there. The particular moment is very important. Moment is important. And the present is important, but he goes one step more. Not the present, the presencing of the presence. The presencing of the presence is important. What he wants to say, he is giving the concept of gatherings. What is gatherings? That you have to gather this meaning from the absence, from the outside, the background, absence, in the presence, and again it will go to the absence. So two more absences there. So you can see the emptiness. Things are in the flux, but you are making the sense of the things. So Heidegger says, and now I have to I'm thinking how to just to make this end of the things. And Rorty, when comes Rorty is taking great inspiration from Martin Heidegger's work. And because of Heidegger, he makes this linguistic term. And in America, because many scholars have come from abroad, America, England, who find a trend of analytical philosophy. That is all great philosophy. But that what Professor Gopal Guru always says, that theory of mind, and that should be also the life of mind, the lived experience. So this experiential dimension of engagement, you find this is very, very important, and that's why the great credit goes to Hegel. Hegel brings the sense of history, and later on the development of history, understanding of history. Heidegger writes in the second last chapter of Being and Time that Hegel also has not understood history properly. He is giving the sense of historicality, temporality in different way, because past is not outside. In you, past is there. And future is also not out, it is in you. You are always in future, thinking of future with some projections of mind. So this is there. Yes. Hmm. Yes. Yes. 3 minutes. And this is the. Uh, hmm. So then you find what I was saying. Going to our mind. Ha! And with this sense of temporality, he makes a shift from epistemology to ontology, and the things are there. Rorty is trying to uh, go for higher degree of implication. He says, I'm not going to the later Heidegger, the post-Kehre side. He is not agree with in agreement with these things. Is going to the early Heidegger, but again he is not agree with the concept of being in that sense. He says again there is not some kinds of ontological or metaphysical essence there. He wants to say, and he is just trying to amplifying all these things, and uh, and with this he wants to make it more and more pragmatic. In Buddhism, all of you know that, all of us know that there are different kinds of amplification. At like 5 kinds generally people say that no amplification there. Uh, but the basic goal is to make this life more meaningful and to give possibility to this world. And with this, I stop here. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, sir, for your meaningful talk, which is also thought provoking. But now it is open to the audience for queries and questions. Yes, sir, please.
This is the question, and we know that many books are written on this thing. Heidegger, I'm not going to say in favor of Heidegger or anyone, but he didn't leave Germany that time. When Levinas left, Benjamin left, many guys left Germany. He was there, he became rector there. And later he said, I was not politically mature. So fascism, what was his association? Because this time comes. So this is there, he said that I was not politically mature. Now your question on what you said on existentialism, rationalism. Yeah, of course, it is the critique of region because phenomenological experience is there. Region confines the thing. Yes. Thank you. Please. Hmm. I am not going to speak on fascism. Fascism is something which people work that time in the Holocaust was Germany. So my work is on being in time. Thank you. We are talking about the influence of Heidegger. Yes. Yes, very much. And one thing more. When people criticize Heidegger for turning into or supporting fascism of Hitler, is the philosophy of Heidegger logically leads to that type of
political standpoint,
Very good, sir.
or is it some sort of what happens all over the world, even in India, this is happening,
Mm.
that people of different philosophical standpoints are supporting single political perspective. So this is the question.
Thank you, sir. So two questions you have asked. I'm going to the first. Then the Sartre nothingness. As I said earlier, that it confines to the level of existence, and he is doing existentialist philosophy. His goal is existence. But Heidegger says that I will not be happy if somebody will keep me in the domain of existentialism. His method is that of existentialism because he's making analytic of the sign. But he wants to, I just said, that to break the door of existence to see the presence of truth, aletheia. That's why he's writing poetry, language, and thought. He's mentioning Hölderlin's poetry, Selling's poetry like this. Second question is that uh, something is there or not. Many scholars of the world want to know who was the person behind this Holocaust, the philosopher. Somebody said it's Hegel. This is Hegel. Somebody said it's Heidegger. Our point is that Sankara's Brahmasutra Bhasya gives the theory of nirvana, moksha, but many Sankarites attack Buddhists. Many Sankarites attacks other guys, Muslims. So we will say Sankara's problem is there. No, it is perhaps the problem in that, but some seed would be there. It's yeah. Oh, no, sir. No, sir. Anyway, but sir, this would be there. But this is going. This I'm not very much expert of that thing. That now who was the cause behind the Holocaust. But anyway, but people say sometimes Hegel, sometimes Heidegger, sometimes Nietzsche. So that it will be difficult in saying that who was the reason behind this now this emergence Holocaust. Hmm.
Sir, my question is on nihilism. Does nihilism contradict itself? Like it says that everything is meaningless. So isn't it sort of a meaning that everything is meaningless? Is it giving another meaning, another godly or divine meaning to things that everything is meaningless?
Please. Thank you. Point is that there is no essence. I was listening to one lecture by one disciple of Ramakrishna Mission, Swami Sarpriyanandji. He did his PhD from Harvard Divinity School. He was saying one line of Ramakrishna Paramhansa that when you go to see the Atman, कि इनमें कोई सार नहीं, there is no essence there. So there is no essence in this world. Then there is no. Sometimes you will feel in the time of death, some very near and dear to you dies. Then the life is meaningless. No shar, no essence. Again, you create meaning. So he wants to say that there is no essential meaning in the world. Emptiness is, you can see that this thing. And the effect of this, Schopenhauer was very much influenced by Buddhist theory. Understand? And but there is an attempt to make meaning in the world. There's active nihilism. So this you can see this thing. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, and thank you, audience, for rigorous participation and presentation. Now, I would like to request Biplab Winker. Yes. And also, I can request to all the speakers to think about the timing, 20 minutes for presentation and 10 minutes for discussion. The Jukot time from the presentation, obviously it will cut from the discussion.
Good afternoon. Uh, First of all, thanks to Professor Rahul for this invitation. Hello. And thanks to Dr. Pramod for giving my name for this seminar. So my paper is on From Fetish to Liberation, Zizek's Critique of Western Buddhism and the Transformative Potential of Ambedkar's New Buddhism. I guess I'm trying to justify the title of this seminar, Coping with this World. I'm doing a few things in my paper. First thing is I'm just putting forward Zizek's critique of Western Buddhism as in a kind of fetishism or as in kind of ideology. Then I'm trying to apply this criticism on Ambedkar's Buddhism, and I'm trying to justify that how Ambedkar tries to escape from this critique of Zizek. Third thing is I'm arguing that yes, classical Buddhism cannot escape from the critique of Zizek. Yes, there is a kind of withdrawal and detachment in a classical Buddhism, and I'm providing the reason for that. The next thing is I try to argue that how Ambedkar tried to escape from this critique of Zizek, that is detachment, withdrawal, and fetishism. And towards the end, I try to formulate this whole attempt of Baba Sahib as an political emancipation in a typical on Jewish question. Marx have made this distinction between political emancipation versus total human emancipation. So I'm arguing that the project of 1956 wasn't political emancipation, which is not an end in itself. Yes, it has its historical role, but not an end. So this is my theme. So I'm just reading out certain things of my paper. The Slovenian philosopher Slavoj Žižek is known for his critique of Western Buddhism, which he have elaborated in last 10, 12 years in many of books like The Fragile Absolute, then On Belief, then in Puppet and the Dwarf, in Less Than Nothing, and in recent time, uh, uh, Christian Atheism, even in the last recent book, Again Progress. So I'm just referring to the early critique of Zizek on Western Buddhism, and that is Western Buddhism as an fetishist mode of ideology of led capitalism. So in On Belief, while defining the new threat to the Judeo-Christian tradition, Zizek used the classical Marxist dichotomy and argues that European technology and capitalism are the base of the entire new world, but the superstructure of this base is Eastern thought, that is Tao and Western Buddhist thought, which functions as ideology of global capitalism. To this end, Western Buddhism tried to provide a relief against the stressful tension of capitalist dynamics, allowing us to uncouple and retain inner peace. It actually functions as an perfect ideology of ideological supplement. Here, Zizek says that the life of the normal individual in advanced capitalism is constant state of tension, threats, fear of losing jobs, competition among the workers, and the burden of monthly targets. And in such stressful world, the Western Buddhism tried to provide a peace to newly emerged class of service provider by offering mindfulness or meditational practices. Zizek argues that the reason Western Buddhism offers the better predicament is its philosophical nature. I quote, Western Buddhism teaches that one should keep an inner distance from the acceleration of technology and capitalism. One should drift along, let oneself go from the acceleration. This distancing is based on philosophy, which argues that all the social and technological upheavals are ultimately just a non-substantial purification of semblance, which do not really concern with the innermost kernel of being. I end quote. Further, Zizek argues that Western Buddhism is a fetishist mode of ideology in our alliedly post-ideological era. For Zizek, fetishism means embodiment of lies which enable us to sustain the unbreathable truth. That means I accept the non-existence of something in life, but I still invest my emotion in in something related to that non-existent thing. And this thing in which I have invested my emotion help me in denial of death or non-existence of the thing. One is not living in an alternative world. Rather, one accept the non-existence of things or death of someone, but invest in something through which one tries to manage the traumatic situation. Meditation practice or mindfulness of Western Buddhism is a fetish that helps human to practice in advance and late capitalist speed, which while helping you pretend that you are really not into it. You are fully aware of how worthless this spectacle is. What matters is you know you can always withdraw from all this process. So this is a basic theme of the Zach critique of Western Buddhism. I'm not going into Less Than Nothing and other books for a time constraint. So I'm just jumping to the next part, whether this critique is applicable to Ambedkar's Buddhism or not. Uh, the upcoming part of this paper tries to apply Zizek's criticism of Buddhism to Ambedkar's New Buddhism, which he developed before and after the conversion into Buddhism. In the same way that Zizek is concerned about the ordinary individuals of late capitalism, the way they are stuck in ideology of Western Buddhism, Ambedkar was primarily concerned with the ordinary individuals, particularly the newly converted lower caste. The question before newly converted people was small and material in a nature. The social question was seeking liberty, fraternity, equality in the society in which they live, seeking recognition as human, seeking freedom to do things which they wish to do, getting education and other civil rights. Uh, there are many other counterparts. Like there are many other counterparts all over the world, like blacks, slaves, women, third world people, etc. The material question was the same as that of any other proletarian people in part of world: poverty, exploitation, long working hours, pathetic working conditions, alienation of all sorts, being victims of disease like TB and many other ordinary problems. In the long 20th century, after more than 70 years of conversion to Buddhism, the problem faced by ordinary individuals are still the same. Like the problem of ordinary individuals of late capitalism, which Zizek discussed, all these problems are applicable to ordinary individuals in Indian subcontinent as well. The only difference is, unlike their European counterparts, the ordinary individuals do not find uh, a kind of salvation in Western Buddhism or Eastern Buddhism. Though Buddhism of any sort is not practicing ideology of Buddhist and non-Buddhist in India, being limited to the role of antique museum piece kept at uh, home or for decoration or something taken outside of routine political assertion. Nevertheless, this paper tries to do the philosophical exercise of bringing together the critique of Buddhism with Ambedkar's version of Buddhism and try to find the answer to the following questions. As I said, whether it is applicable or not. Uh, so to answering Zizek's question, let me go back to Baba Sahib's magnum opus, that is Buddha and his Dhamma. Though the Buddha of Ambedkar is radical, egalitarian, and proposes universality, despite all this fact, the central question remains, that is, does Ambedkar's Buddha provide an answer to Zizek's critique? So, primarily, I argued that yes, Ambedkar's Buddha is not escaping the critique of Zizek. That is, yes, it teaches detachment, it teaches withdrawal if we follow the traditional conception of Buddhism. That is, there is suffering and there is a way of suffering, though Ambedkar tried to reformulate the four Arya Satya into two, but even after reformulation of two Arya Satyas, yes, this detachment is very much there. uh, I'm jumping to the next section, that how Ambedkar tries to escape from this issue of withdrawal or detachment. The problem of okay, huh. The first sermon, that Dhamma Chakra Pravartan Sutta, is a fundamental sermon of Buddhist philosophy. In this sermon, Siddhartha preaches that Four Noble Truth theory is Dukkha, and Dukkha Nirodha Marga. Ambedkar has reformulated this foundational philosophy of Four Noble Truth into two truth. This reformulation of the Noble Truth serves two purposes. First, it negates the age-old critique of Buddha as a preacher of pessimism by emphasizing on the way of suffering. In the classical version of the first sermon, the second truth, that is, the cause of suffering, is the root of suffering. There are an individual possess three kinds of desire, that is, a bhavatrishna, vibhavatrishna, and kamatrishna, towards the object which is momentary in nature. Suffering occurs in individual's life. Philosophically, it is the most rational reason for the misery of life. But due to this same reason, Buddha develops the theory of detachment, because desire and objects of desire are the root cause of human suffering. Ambedkar rejects this second truth and the subjective reason for individual suffering. But now the question arises, if one rejects the root cause of suffering, then how to provide the reason for the first truth, that is there is suffering. If suffering exists before my birth itself, then it is not due to my action. And here one is not considering suffering which arises due to the caste or class or race or gender, but rather here suffering as an integral part of life. The Judeo-Christian answer for this condition is, I have fallen from the grace of God, that's why I'm in a misery. Or the classical Hinduism will justify this state by arguing that it is there due to my past karma. Ambedkar cannot accept both the reason because both the reason are metaphysical in nature. How then can suffering occur in our life? Now the question remains, if an agent is not responsible for the existence of suffering or misery, then how does suffering occurs in our life? Ambedkar tried to provide the answer to this first truth, that is, there is suffering, by introducing the theory of patit, or what he translates as theory of fallen. This term is Dr. Ambedkar is taking from the typical Christian theology. As Dr. Ambedkar says that there are everywhere people who are fallen, but there are two classes of fallen, who have standards and fallen who does not have standards. The fallen who have no standard does not know that he is fallen. On the other hand, a person who has standards try to rise from the fallen state. The answer is that he knows that he is fallen. In this two paragraph on the theory of fallen, Dr. Ambedkar has resolved many philosophical and ethical issues, and at the same time, Ambedkar saves his version of Buddhism from the trap of detachment. But before getting into detail of how Ambedkar resolved this above mentioned crisis, one need to comment on the theory of the fallen itself. The first line in Buddha is Dhamma, where he says that there are everywhere people who are fallen. This very line suggests one kind of formal equality similar to how everyone is equal in front of God. The second thing is, though the theory of fallen tries to save Dr. Ambedkar's version of Buddhism from detachment, but Dr. Ambedkar does not provide the reason for the fall, nor does Ambedkar tell us that from where we have fallen. The state of fallen is a given here. If we recall Judeo-Christian tradition from where this term is taken, the humans are in Judeo-Christian tradition. They disobeyed the God and have fallen. That's why they have fallen from the grace of God. The concept of fallen is like Sartre's concept of abandonment from existentialism and humanism. But Sartre provides the reason for abandonment by arguing that after the death of God, one is in a state of abandonment. The common element here is God, is either its grace or either its death. And the equality which arises after the fallen from the heaven or after the death of God. Ambedkar does not provide the reason for the fallen state, and nor does he tell us from where he have fallen from. But Ambedkar continued the idea of formal equality, which is inherent in the state of fallen. As mentioned above, the idea of fallen is taken from the Judeo-Christian. Okay. Now, once subject realizes that one is fallen, one needs to arise from the fallen condition, needs to provide the standard for the life. At the very moment, the role of Dhamma begins. For Ambedkar, the Dhamma is to walk on the path of purity, righteousness, and virtues. That means rise from the fallen state, means to practice the virtues of morality. The virtues and morality are taught by the virtuous or moral person. The moral person here is enlightened one, the Buddha. And that is why, yes, thank you. And that is why Ambedkar says that Buddha is Margadata and not the Mokshadata. But point here is, although Ambedkar overthrows the logical entities like God and prophet while propagating the idea of the fallen, but by introducing the necessity of morality by elevating from the fallen state, Ambedkar brings back the authority of moral person, that is Buddha and his teaching, the Dhamma. And this the reason I earlier argued that Ambedkar does not use. Okay, I'm keeping that part. Getting back to the problem of rising from the fallen state, as mentioned earlier, one rise by the following the path of virtue and purity, and this path is the Eightfold Path. Dr. Ambedkar argues that the Eightfold Path helps the individual to eradicate their beliefs in rights, belief in holy scripture, and superstition. It also teaches the truthfulness and other things. The second justification for providing the standard for life can be traced back in a discussion of distinction between dharma and dhamma. So what I'm trying to suggest is, Ambedkar tried to escape uh, the crisis of Buddhism, that is withdrawal, detachment. Then Zizek also argued in Less Than Nothing that how there is a kind of egoistic individualism in Mahayana, how there is a metaphysical retrieval in individualistic egoism in Hinayana and metaphysical retrieval in Mahayana. Uh, and so Ambedkar is familiar with all these things. So my point is, uh, if we follow the individualistic freedom, like nirvana or freedom from suffering, salvation from the suffering, yes, we are falling in the trap of detachment and withdrawal, which Zizek has pointed out. But when you try to situate your philosophy from the perspective of equality of many, a collective equality, then you try to provide the answer to this detachment and withdrawal. As Ambedkar says that when you need dhamma, when two people are staying together, so dhamma is morality here, and in a way there is an ethics towards the other, in Ambedkar, and Ambedkar tried to uh, escape himself and his version of Buddhism from the withdrawal. This is my second argument. Last thing. 1 minute. And the last thing is, as I said, but yes, though he is escaping from the what you say withdrawal and detachment of classical Buddhism, but in absolute sense, Ambedkar's Buddhism is not resolving the question. But yes, that was a necessity of historical time. The point is how to overcome this legacy and overcome the 21st century questions of contemporary led capitalist individuals. Thank you.
Criticism of Neo Buddhism or Western Buddhism applies to Navayana from Ambedkar or not. And though he has not, he has taken the mild standpoint, but I think that it does not apply to Ambedkar's Navayana. Why? Because Jesus' criticism is mostly based on Buddhism as perceived based on meditation. Yes. Whereas Baba Sahib's Navayana is based on ethics, as Professor Gokhale is here. He has, so I also think that Jesus' criticism does not apply to Neo-Buddhism of India or Baba Sahib. So now this presentation is open for discussion. Any question? Dr. Bagre? I think there should be some inquiries or questions from Dr. Bagre or Professor Gokhale or Gopal Guru.
Yes, sir. So, hi, thank you for your presentation. It's very interesting. So, I mainly work on like classical Buddhism, so I'm not very familiar with Dr. Ambedkar's version. But I mean, based on what you said, so the problem is patti, so from patati, so to fall, the fallen state. That seems to me to be a social and a political thing. But the solution, as you have presented it, again, I'm not an expert, is this ethical path, this path of ethical cultivation, as Dr. Ambedkar presents it. So isn't there a kind of mismatch there? Because if Patti is about like a fallen state, which is more social and political, and the solution is more of is the solution mainly personal ethical cultivation? And if that is the case, how does that resolve the fallen socio-political state?
I don't think so. There's a contradiction. Yes, fallen state is a political condition, and what Ambedkar is trying to provide is providing a morality to rise from that situation. Why it is not in contradiction? I know the immediate necessity of such kind of fallen person is a material condition, But along with the material condition, one needs some kind of ethics, that how to live with the other. And yes, such kind of ethics is playing a preliminary role to get into the material conditions. Even such kind of person don't even have that access to get into material conditions. So for me, it is playing a historical role by providing a space into getting into the real world and then develop their material conditions. That's my take. Yes, sir.
Proletarized, like proletarized, as it were, or when you talk about people as being oppressed, and when you talk about people fallen, the implications in terms of agency are very different.
Yes.
And if I'm not mistaken, I saw very often the idea of broken people and not fallen people, as it were. So would you like to draw a distinction between all of them, and then which would then lead to the further resolution in terms of individual and collective resolution to the problem? Because if it's a retrieval of agency, then the retrieval of agency will come through a collective revolution in certain cases, through conscientization of the Freirian kind, or it would be in terms of just doing the individual tap and becoming a good person, as it were, because that's the kind of thing which you seem to be suggesting towards the end, that the individual rising up with his ethical power from fallen to non-fallen. So
I'm not suggesting
yeah,
that.
no, but that's what it sounded like. So I thought that maybe it would be wise to clarify.
Viplab, this is just following from Rakesh, is something for your consideration. The terms that you are using, fallen, is normally not invoked in the public discussion. What is uh, often talked about is broken people. So you can always make a case for fallen, but at the moment you have to take into consideration, fallen is something which has to be understood in terms of these people had somewhere they were equal and they have fallen. If they were equal, then what is it? Is it natural condition? What is it? Natural disposition? Was it natural? Everybody was there, but these people have fallen. They 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 were falling themselves, or they were pushed down. Broken actually is a very politically charged. You are separated, beyond the particular field of beyond. I mean, you are outside. You are in Chamaroti. You are in Cheri. You are in Dalitwada. You are Marwada. So you are broken in terms of your existential conditions, and you are also the space conceptual space also is broken in that is. So I think you have to find out which one is which one is superior. Fallen you will explain the whole thing, or broken will explain the whole thing.
No.
You have to take a call on this.
Yes. Yeah. Personally, my use is broken and politicization, not fallen. Why I have used that theory of fallen? My point is that Zizek critique, the centrality of Zizek critique is uh, the individual who is trying to escape itself from the late capitalism and the crisis of late capitalism, and trying to seek the individual freedom. That is my point first. So what I'm trying to suggest that Ambedkar, while forwarding the idea of fallen, uh, try to escape from this individual liberation or nirvana of that sort, and says that when you are fallen, again I even said it, Ambedkar is not justifying from where it is fallen, though he is taking from Christ, but there is no clear idea that from where he is fallen. So what Ambedkar tried to say that when you say fallen, now you have two kind of fallens, those who are aware and those who don't. And those who are aware they can have a morality of their own and they can rise from that fallen condition. And there, this individualistic freedom is escaped by Ambedkar by providing the idea of collective equality in form of Dhamma and Sadhamma. That was my point. So I'm not vouching to the idea of fallen at all. Okay, I'm vouching to the idea of broken. I'm vouching to the idea of proletariat and politicization of the people. That is my take. So my only point is this distinction between primacy to the freedom versus primacy to the equality. That's all. Thank
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. And thank you all. Now we can invite another speaker, Mansi Bes. Please come.
स्लाइड शो कैसे चेंज करना है स्लाइड शो पे ओके
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Mansi Vash. I've completed my PhD from University of Lucknow, and I'm currently an assistant professor in Manipal University, Jaipur. Today I will present my paper on some reflections on Rorty's pragmatic understanding of philosophy, where I will primarily try to show how Rorty gave a critique of whole foundationalistic philosophy, and with that, in Philosophy and the Mirror of Nature, he tried to offer edificationary method, and with which it's often understood that it's often understood that misunderstood that Rorty stands against such foundationalistic notion of the philosophy, and when he is doing so, he is trying to reject whole uh, whole notion of philosophy. And also, I would try to mention that Rorty's rejection of philosophy is based on his pragmatic understanding of philosophy, which offers three characteristics mentioned in Consequences of Pragmatism. And based on these characteristics, I will try to show that it has some kind of limitation when we talk about uh, denying philosophy as a whole. So I will quickly begin with a quick introduction. Um, excuse me, just a second. Sorry, it's fine. Under okay. Yeah. So yeah, Richard Rorty, one of the most influential philosophers of the American pragmatist tradition, known for reconstructing philosophers' self-image by attacking on the very fundamental doctrine of philosophy, and he responds to philosophy's so-called perennial and eternal problems, which revolve around the knowledge claims and concerns with the knowledge foundations. So Rorty considers these foundations as an attempt to escape from the history which helps in dismissing universal and objective truths. This is because the mind provides the best representation of foundationalistic conception of knowledge, which paves the way for genuine knowledge. And when carefully observed, it is noted that philosophy is often considered foundational as it adjudicates knowledge claims and works through the consequences of conception of knowledge as an accurate representation, which is deeply rooted in the metaphor called a glassy essence. It aims to bring out the correct picture of the reality where knowing represents what's outside the mind and understanding the nature of possibility, and language shows how the mind constructs and represents things. Therefore, philosophy's main concern in a way became limited to the general theory of representation, which represents well, less well, or simply masquerades of doing so. So this philosophy, so this image of philosophy as a representation rooted representation existed since the time of traditional Greek philosophers, which made philosophy foundational and made whole development of philosophy, and with this whole development of philosophy took place. So yeah, in Plato's philosophy, we see that knowledge known in the forms of universals. In Aristotle, we see it lies in knowing the final element of being. In Descartes' philosophy, we see that knowledge has to be clear and distinct with indubitability, and which later led to the Locke's philosophy, where knowledge is based on theory of representation, and this further gave rise to the Kant's notion of philosophy, where knowledge was pure reason and can be attained through the systematic a priori judgments, and this Kantian notion further led to an emergence of analytical, continental, and linguistic debates in philosophy. In all these foundational philosophers, some kind of normativity was held. So it can be observed that one thing was common throughout the development of philosophy. In the different times, different philosophers claim to have a method or a way of doing philosophy, which helps in knowing reality, truths, or meanings. These philosophers claim to have one single objective conception of knowledge which can fit in all the cultures, and suggested that if we know these essences, we can know and understand things in an accurate way. In short, they claim to have some kind of authority of philosophizing in a correct way, which makes philosophy foundational. Interestingly, Rorty pointed out in Philosophy in the Mirror of Nature that because of this foundational ideology, the whole nature of philosophy got shattered, and hence he preferred to dismantle this foundationistic image of philosophy, which was established by some professional philosophers existed in the history of philosophy. He takes this stance as the claim held by philosophers would not offer a solution to the problem in all the kinds of culture, and this would restrict the growth of social, moral, epistemological, and metaphysical concern in the philosophy. Rorty made his best attempts to expose the artificiality of these philosophers in Philosophy and the Mirror of Nature. He deeply dives into the debates of problem related to minds in the first section called mirroring. For this, and also the problem of representation in the second section named mirroring. For this, he uses his most famous two-step strategy, where he first softens up the problem, bipolarizes it by taking the best possible opponents, and then at second step, he simply realizes that problems are of no use, so we can set them aside. Rorty undermines these philosophical problems as it was raised by traditional and professional philosophers who based philosophy on the notion of pictorial representation, where mind knows the reality in a best way as it is capable of representing things accurately. So Rorty here points out that all these philosophers were trying to offer some kind of final answers to philosophy. Even modern race problems related to analytical and linguistic philosophy are not the newly constructed concern, but they are merely a response to Kantian conception of philosophy, whether in favor of it or against it. So in the third section of PMN, which is Philosophy and the Mirror of Nature, so the third section, which is philosophy, Rorty sees hermeneutics as an alternative way of doing philosophy, which is a way of commensurability. He prefers hermeneutics over epistemology as it provides a scope for adapting different common grounds, which further offers us a scope for conversation with some hope of agreement in philosophy. Here it seems that Rorty takes philosophy as a conversation and not as a mere inquiry. His whole point was that we should get after acquiring the vocabulary correctly, rather should focus on simply participating in the conversation, which looks like a giving a way to his pragmatic understanding of philosophy. Here, on Gadamer's emphasis. Here, insistence was made on Gadamer's emphasis on hermeneutics, that it should not be taken as method of finding truth. Rather, it should be taken as a way of redescribing our vocabularies, where we can express ourselves and cope well with the world. Rorty called this kind of approach an edification, which leads us to the fruitful conversation and insist on incommensurable vocabularies and redescription, which is another way of making philosophy sustainable discipline. This approach was seen in the later part of three ideals of Rorty as well, which were later Wittgenstein, Dewey, and Heidegger. With their efforts, philosophy became therapeutic. They promise to provide us incommensurable vocabularies where we can redescribe things depending on the need in the different cultures. Here, one can have choice to escape from philosophical problem and do not have to bother constantly about offering solutions to them. In all these three philosophers, Rorty admired the fact that there is a sense of commonality seen in that they all leave their traditional foundations aside and offer something new to philosophy. It can be noted that the whole stress was on the fact that how useful and functional these philosophical notions are for us. Like we see in later Wittgenstein philosophical investigation, we see that the emphasis shifted to the elucidation of grammatical structure and language, where philosophical notion have modifications. It tried to deprofessionalize philosophy by discarding the Cartesian conception, which was seen in his early work. In Heidegger too, it was seen that he tried to give up his traditional notion of the historical being, which was Dasein, and in his later work, he stresses that his being should be capable of reinterpreting itself. He sees philosophy as a poetic achievement where auditory metaphors are used as tools to transform human experience by providing a scope for contingent notion. Apart from these two, even in Dewey, we see that there was a thrust for enlarging human freedom by redefining and reconceiving ethical and the social aspect of the culture. His philosophy is seen as an instrument for social change. Do we set aside Kantian distinction, which has its root in representationalist view, and asserted to have a method which can help us to cope things better instead of copying, and this can be seen as a criticism of traditional culture which holds some kind of purity. In all these three philosophers, there was commonality found that all three were insisting on contingency and redescriptions, and which are needed for better understanding of human, which plays a vital role in social and cultural progress, which I think Rorty admires most. All three philosophers offered a treatment to philosophy when it was at its decline. Rorty admired that these philosophers, as they are insisted on providing theories where the way of looking truths, meanings, knowledge can be modified depending on the need and its uses. This shows that the Rorty's own philosophical understanding was very much pragmatic in nature, which focuses on some kind of utility and contingency. The notion of edification appeared in Rorty's PMN, which also paves the way for pragmatism in Rorty, in prag, of way for pragmatism in Rorty's way of doing philosophy. But we need to see how far it takes us, and does it offer solution to the all kinds of philosophical problem. In the introduction to philosophy and the social hope, Rorty acknowledges himself to be a pragmatist, and because he finds himself very close to Dewey. And looking at pragmatism, it has been generally understood in a yeah, pragmatism. Okay, I'll just quickly explain because time is very less. So pragmatism in general has been understood as something where theories, sorry, theory that proposition is true if it is holding it proposition is true if holding it to be true. Sorry, there is some. So yeah, pragmatism in general has been taken as something what works out more effectively in practice and have to be successful and effective. So I'll just quickly come to Rorty's, uh, yeah, I'm just coming. So Rorty basically offers three kinds of characteristics when he talks about pragmatism. I'm not discussing the whole history of pragmatism here. So basically he offers three characteristics to pragmatism, where firstly he mentions that uh, uh, in the paper titled Pragmatism, Relativism and Irrationalism, in his book Consequences of Pragmatism, he mentions that real pragmatists are those who stands against Cartesian quest for certainty, which further gave rise to Kantian pure reason, where reality holds intrinsic nature and it stands for social hope to liberate civilization for less, which is for less cruel world. So Rorty, in this regard, Rorty offers three characteristics of pragmatism. One was anti-essentialism, um, which says that it should be free from essences and does not have correspondence to reality. Rorty held this view to support this previous position that we should refrain from essences as it leads us to object of inquiry. For him, the genuine pragmatist would look for vocabularies which can be used in practice and actions which are useful. Second, characteristics which he offered is that there should be no epistemological difference between truth and what ought to be truth, no metaphysical difference between facts and values, and no methodological difference between morality and sciences. With this also, he insists that inquiry should be consist of different vocabulary, where philosophical method can have possibility of substitutes. He considers that notion where rationality is compelled to have normativity is merely a myth. Third characteristics he offers that no constraints on inquiry saves the conversational one. With this, he means that those inquiry which are the part of conversation cannot have any limitation as it offers us a scope of contingency. And this last characteristics of pragmatism is basically very much close to Rorty's understanding. And here I need to make a remark that I think that the view of Rorty is quite conflicting as the two, which is no epistemological, metaphysical, and methodological difference. So I think here it does not seem very much reliable, as with this he tries to collapse normativity altogether. And when we talk about normativity in a sense of good truths or reality, then we need to have some criteria to understand their fundamentals. And we cannot rely these notions on the basis of some subjective and the changeable criteria. And also, when we notice three, which is no constraints on inquiry save the conversational ones, here he tries to claim, here it basically, this characteristics tries to claim to have no constraints on those inquiry which are a part of conversation and have different vocabularies in scope of contingency and redescriptions, which seems to have a limited sense of role which can fit into the um, which can fit into the social concern, but not in all kinds of philosophy. And I think here Rorty's pragmatism seems viable only to some extent and cannot be taken as a wholesome approach which has solutions to all the philosophical problems. So we can say that Rorty even again, Rorty's post-philosophical culture, which he strives to offer, we can say that it is based on his pragmatism, but it has some limited sense, limited, uh, uh, we can say, yeah, it has some limited scope in which it seeks to have some kind of a moral and social progress of the culture. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now the paper is open for discussion. Yes, ma'am.
Quite new to me, so I have some very naive curiosities that I just wanted to know how Rorty would handle mathematics, because I'm not talking about ethics because then I'll be asking too many questions, but Mathematics at least has a kind of anti-pragmatic approach. So how Rorty handles this, and whether, talking of anti-essentialism, how would he hold natural kinds? I mean, would he be dissolving the distinction between natural kinds and non-natural kinds, as he had been interestingly dissolving the distinctions between fact and value, morality and science? Would he be dissolving that as well? These are my two questions.
Ma'am, mathematics. Sorry. Where? Sir, philosophy in the mirror of nature, I don't think so that he mentioned. Sir, I have gone through the book. Matlab, it would be great if you can show me, so it will help me as well. Yeah.
Refers to that 2 plus 2 equal to 4, and the idea of an electron, they are discourse relative. Okay. So mathematics has its place in nature as well as in science, as per Rorty, but not in a foundationalist way. Why not? That is explained there.
The answer would come through the Kripkean kind, that you finally dissolve all of it and take the position of the natural kind term as much as the proper noun, as well as class names. All of them become functionally like rigid designators. So Rorty would have to accept that, because that's the kind of thing, because he is identifying himself more and more with Putnam. And yeah, and it yeah. So what happens is that,
he is foundationalist in terms of, because he is rejecting those philosophers who are holding some kinds of essences and the notion of
right. But these real essences are in what they call a straightforward, ordinary sense of being out there. You remember the oldest paper in this reference was that paper was called "The World Well Lost." So are we worlds apart, or are we words apart? In that, yeah. So he would say that we are just words apart.
Further, added to that. I did my PhD on Rorty, so I cannot leave it like that. See, point here is that my PhD is 1999. It's now 25 years old. PhD. No, 1 second. This is a prelude that has to be given. Now, Rorty should not be misunderstood in dissolving any of these metaphysical, dualities. He calls them dualities, and he critiques them. That the line between natural kind and nominal kind is only a kind of a language game that you play, and nothing more than that. You can't attribute an essence to that. So water is H2O. I know. Both water is a nominal kind and H2O is a natural kind, but they are combined. And he picks this up from Wilfred Sellars. So I mean, there's no Occam's razor that he removes from science. Very much different from Putnam and Kripke, right? Obviously. I mean, he criticizes Kripke for falling back into nominalism. Falling back into? Nominalism. Yeah. No, but real essences has a nominal representation in a certain possible world. So therefore, there is a certain kind of nominalism that Rorty sees in, Kripke.
Thank you so much, Mansi. Also, thanks to all the audience for the rigorous participation. Now we have another speaker, Dr. Nitish Singh, please.
Thank you, sir. A very good afternoon to all of you. I'm Nitish Singh, an assistant professor here, and I'm delighted to have this opportunity to present my paper on the role of reasons and epistemological inquiry into Dharmakirti's Nyaya and Dharmottaracharya's Tika, that is Nyaya Tika. So as we know, Dharmakirti, a 6th century Buddhist philosopher, and Dharmottaracharya, his renowned 7th century commentator, are significant figures in the history of Buddhist philosophy, and their works deeply explore the concept of reasoning and the role of reason, that is hetu, as we know, in establishing valid knowledge, especially the indirect one. So basically, I'm going to talk about hetu or reason and what its role in the Tika and Nyaya Bindu basically. So in the opening verses of the Nyaya Bindu, Dharmakirti suggests that the need to write this text is to investigate right knowledge, that is samyak gyan, because he thinks that all successful human action is preceded by this only. So all successful human action is preceded by the right knowledge. That's why it is important to discuss and investigate what right knowledge is. So further he talks of two kinds of right knowledge in terms of pratyaksha and anumana and starts defining them. We get the definition of knowledge, also known as pramana. So here in Dharmakirti and Dharmottaracharya's view, pramana and knowledge, samyak gyan and pramana, both are same. As it is defined as anadhigata vishayam avisamvadakam jnanam pramanam. Means a cognition is both non-contradicted and previously unacquired. This definition underscores the dual criteria for valid knowledge. Number one, it must reveal the object as it truly is, that is avisamvadakam. And second, it must present something novel, anadhigatattva. It means that right knowledge, according to Dharmakirti, has two criteria. It is knowledge not contradicted by experience, and it is cognition, and that cognition is concerned with the object not yet cognized. It is believed that the right knowledge serves the practical purpose of guiding successful action, that is known as artha kriya karitva. Since Bhranti, Sanshay, Swapna, and Smriti, they do not lead to successful actions, therefore they are the Mithya Jnana. Dharmakirti classifies knowledge into two primary categories. Direct knowledge or perception, and it has various names like Sakshatkari, Pratyaksha, Nirvikalpak, etc. And this knowledge arises through immediate perception and it is devoid of conceptual construction. So we know that Kalpana Purham Bhrantam. This is Pratyaksha. This is neither construction nor illusion. And the indirect knowledge or inference, this is also known as Lingaj, Paroksha, Vikalpak, Savikalpak, or Anumana. So it is mediated through an internal reasoning process or communication process relying on inferential or verbal cognition. So the object of cognition or vishay for these two categories differs significantly. Direct knowledge apprehends the particular, that is Swalakshana, the unique momentary phenomena constituting reality, and indirect knowledge, on the other hand, grasps universal, Samanya Lakshana, through the mediation of conceptual constructs, that is Vikalpa. This is called Pramana Vyavastha. So we know that in Dharmakirti and Dharmottaracharya, epistemological framework, it is Pramana Vyavastha. So one Pramana is basically, granted to grasp one kind of Vishaya. So both the Pramanas, Vishayas are twofolds. The prima facie apprehended, that is known as Grahya Vishaya, and the definitely realized, that is known as Adhyavasaya Vishaya. So the reality, Drishyamana Vastu, as per Buddhist epistemology, has two aspects, general essence and real essence. The real essence of reality is directly perceived by perception, yani ki grahya vishaya. And the general essence is imagined aspect of reality and it is directly perceived by anuman. Where comes the hetu in the picture? So hetu ki zarurat hame anuman mein padti hai, pratyaksh mein iski koi zarurat nahi padti hai. In Pratyaksha, we directly perceive the point instants, Swalakshara, but distinctively conceive the general essence of the reality. On the other hand, in Anumana, we directly perceive the general essence of it, but distinctly conceive the unique, that vastu which possesses Artha Kriya Karitva. And that we also know in the Buddhism, Artha Kriya Karitvam Lakshanam Sat. So that is the very lakshar of the Sat. Sat wahi hai jisme Artha Kriya Karitva hai. So within indirect knowledge, Hetu occupies a central position, systematically bridging the gap between perception and cognition of universals. Inference itself hinges on the role of reasons, which serve as the foundation for establishing valid inferential cognition. The reason is called ascertaining reason of indirect cognition. It is like लिंग को हम लोग परोक्ष अर्थ का गमक या फिर निश्चायक कहते हैं. And it is neither the producing cause, that is utpadak karan, nor the informatory cause, ज्ञापक कारण of indirect knowledge. So ये जो हेतु है वो कोई उत्पादक कारण नहीं है, कोई ज्ञापक कारण नहीं है, ये निश्चायक कारण है, गमक है. And Dharmakirti describes inference as tatra swartham trirupalingad yad anumeya jnanam tat anumanam. Yani ki knowledge of the inferred object based on a three-aspected logical mark is inference for oneself, and inference for other is defined as trirupalinga jnanam pararthanumanam. So in both the kinds of anumana, the linga is very important. Linga yani hetu, the reason. And here the triple characterized mark or the three-aspected logical mark refers to threefold criteria that a valid reason must satisfy. Dharmottara, in his commentary, further elucidates that Anuman serves not merely as a logical tool, but as a means to reflect that interdependent nature of reality. Reasons or hetu are not abstract entities, but are firmly grounded in ontological principles such as causality, that is pratitya samutpada, and momentariness, kshanikatva. Thus, reasons under indirect knowledge in Buddhist epistemology represent a profound intersection of epistemological validation and ontological commitment. While epistemology traditionally concerns the validation of knowledge, Buddhist epistemology distinguishes itself by bridging this inquiry with ontological principles, revealing how logical reasoning reflects the structure of reality. The systematic analysis of Hetu in Dharmakirti's framework, particularly the threefold criteria, Trairupya Linga, that define a valid reason, and Dharmottara's elucidation of the relationship between epistemology and ontology, give us a clear understanding of the importance of reason in Buddhist epistemology. Though concepts such as Vyapti, जिसे हम concomitance relation कहते हैं, अविनाभाव संबंध, स्वभाव प्रतिबंध, व्याप्ति संबंध, etc., and foundational relations, there are two foundational relations, tadatmya and tadutpatti, identity and causations. So the study of these two texts reflect on the relevance of these ideas in contemporary philosophical discourse, demonstrating how they transcend logical formalism to address existential and ethical concerns. So Dharmakirti's Buddhist logic integrates formal reasoning with ontological and practical concerns, showing how logical structures like hetu are not just abstract, but deeply tied to the nature of reality and the goal of elevating ignorance, that is avidya. Because शुरुआत ही यहाँ से हुई है सर्व पुरुषार्थ सिद्धि. सभी पुरुषार्थ की सिद्धि के लिए हमें सम्यक ज्ञान को जानना है. सो सम्यक ज्ञान में प्रत्यक्ष अनुमान दोनों को जानेंगे और उससे अविद्या दूर होगा, तो फिर मोक्ष की प्राप्ति होगी. So kinds of hetus and their roles are required to be discussed here. And in Buddhist epistemology, the concept of hetu is central to the inferential process, that is anumana. And Dharmakirti in his Nyaya Bindu talks of how synthetic and analytic judgments are possible. He writes that atra dvau vastu sadhanau ekah pratishedha hetu, meaning inferential cognition is either affirmation or negation. And affirmation is double, as founded either on identity or on causation, whereas denial is founded on negation. Thus, he identifies three primary types of hetus, each fulfilling a specific role in establishing valid knowledge. Number one, swabhava hetu, that is known as identity or intrinsic reason. This type of hetu refers to a reason based on the essential nature or inherent characteristics of an entity. For example, sound is impermanent because it is produced. Shabdah anityah kritakatvat. Here, the production of sound, kritakatva, is an intrinsic characteristics that implies impermanence, anityatva. Or, vriksho ayam shinshapatvat. This is a tree because this is shinshapa. Shinshapa yani shisham. So, the role of Swabhava Hetu here is to highlight the internal logical necessity of the relationship between the reason and the predicate, which is rooted in their shared nature. The next kind of Hetu is Karya Hetu, which is also known as causation or causal reason. This type is based on the causal relationship between the probans and the probandum, where the Hetu is an effect of the Sadhya. For example, There is a fire on the mountain because there is smoke. Parvato Vahaniman Dhumavatvat. It's a very popular, inferential example. So here smoke is a causal effect of fire, establishing the presence of fire, and the very root principle working here is Tasmin Satidam Bhavati. So Karan Karya Sambandha or Karan Karya Siddhant can be seen here. The cause is inferred based on its effect, but not the vice versa. So cause can be inferred based on the effect, but effect cannot be inferred based on the cause. And the role of Karya Hetu emphasizes the dependence of effects on their causes, demonstrating causation as a foundation for valid inference. That is Tadutpatti. And the third kind of Hetu is Anupalabdhi Hetu. So this is reason based on non-perception. This type of hetu is used to establish the absence of something based on its non-perception. Something is not visible to us, and on the basis of this non-perception, we can infer the absence of that particular entity. For example, there is no pot on the table because it is not perceived. So, ghata asti iti na drishyate. So, ayam bhutale ghado nasti. Kaise jana? Because agar hota to dikhai deta. So, the modus tollens structure can be followed here. So the role of Anupalabdhi Hetu is crucial for negative inference, relying on the principle that absence can be validly inferred through the lack of perception under appropriate conditions. And it has 11 varieties. 11 kind of Anupalabdhi ki baat karte hain, according to the difference of formulations, and each plays a significant role in inferring the conclusion differently. And all 10 types of the negative reasons can be reduced in the first one, that is known as the Swabhava Hetu, existential reason, or the identical direct negation. When the question was asked, why there are only 3 logical reasons? They replied, Dharmakirti and Dharmottaracharyas both replied, because one thing can convey the existence of another when it is existentially dependent. Swabhava Pratibandha is the root cause of this. So, why can we deduce one fact from another only if there is existential dependence? If this question is asked, they reply, because a fact which is not so dependent upon another one cannot be invariably and necessarily concomitant with the latter. For example, lamp and fire, they share occasional relation. That is Swabhava Apratibandha. While smoke and fire, they share regular relation, that is Swabhava Pratibandha. Further, we come to know that it is reason which is dependent upon its predicate and not the vice versa. So predicate is not dependent upon the reason, rather reason is dependent upon its predicate. Means the dependent part, ashrita, is logical reason, and independent part is the logical predicate. Okay, so these things are very important, but since there is no time, so I'll just focus on the roles of the hetus in some points. So the first role is the types of hetu works within the framework of Trairupya Linga to ensure that the reason satisfy conditions for logical and empirical validity. The second one is each type of hetu reflects a specific aspect of reality, whether it is the intrinsic nature of things, that is swabhava, their causal dynamics, that is karya, or their absence, that is anupalabdhi. The third role is the types of hetu help establish vyapti, the necessary and universal relationship between the reason and the predicate, which is the foundation of inference. All three aspects of hetu remove different logical fallacies from the inference. The fourth is, this is hetu which makes sure that the anumana can be done in lesser steps, followed by Paksha Dharmata and Vyapti Vakya. Due to the presence of valid hetu, some steps can be removed from the inferential process while communicating it to others. So Occam's razors can be applied here. And in Buddhist thought, hetu is not merely a logical construct, but a means to achieve liberation from ignorance by understanding the nature of causality, impermanence, and interdependence. One develops insights into the true nature of existence, progressing towards soteriological ends. So that's all the roles of the reason has to play within the framework of the inference in Buddhism. Thank you so much.
Many, many thanks, ma'am. Now the paper is open for discussion.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry if anybody wants to ask a question. Anyway, see, I just wanted, I couldn't understand this point that the hetus are embedded in reality, but to understand the hetus, that is, how the hetu and the sadhya, they are being connected together, we have to understand it through a conceptual connection.
Yes.
That is true.
Yeah.
To understand that how the dhula is the effect of the bandi, we have to understand it through a causal law, and that is patently conceptualized. And if it is conceptualized, it is superimposed by samanya lakshana, and that distances us from the reality as it is. So this is the kind of tension which I didn't understand. And another clarification, maybe it is related to this. I didn't understand a hetu is neither utpadaka nor gyapaka but gamaka. Maybe these two are related. I'm not sure.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. This is a wonderful question. For the first one, I would like to say that, as we mentioned, any Drishyamana Vastu has two essences, general essence and the real essence. Real essence can be grasped by the perception. So we perceive the real essence, the point instance. I'm not talking about Buddha. I'm talking about Dharmakirti and Dharmottaracharya's text. What is mentioned in the Nyaya Bindu and Nyaya Bindu Tika. Yes. Swalakshana and Samanya Lakshana, they use the term, ma'am.
Where is the equivalent of essence?
Essence is not basically used. This essence is taken by like Sherbatsky's book. If we read in English version, sometimes in the Buddhist logic, we find this general essence and the real essence, but they don't talk about the essence as such. Not in that
they
way.
do not accept jati. That is
Yeah.
the main thing.
Yeah, they accept the apoha. They are nominalist, basically. They are not conceptualist, so they don't talk about essence. But these terms like general essence or real essence can be equated with the swalakshana and samanya lakshana. It is not basically that essence in the nyayas and maimansaka's terminology, ma'am. This is the first thing. Second question you asked about the gyapak, and this is not the gyapak. This is not the utpadak karan, rather it is gamak. It means that like gyapak karanas are like the lamp is the gyapak karan of our seeing. So we see something in the darkness when lamp comes. So it is a gyapak karan. Then there is a seed, and we get the the sprout from the seed. So the seed becomes the utpadak karan of the sprout. So the ling is not that kind of karan. It is not producing the conclusion or whatever the inference is there. It is not producing it as a seed produces a sprout. Neither it is working as the light. Rather, it is just leading towards that. So it becomes the gamak. Gamak means jo le jata hai hame. So it just shows the path, but not like that light or lamp. It is differently. So ये गमक है, लिंग के अर्थ में ही गमक का प्रयोग करते हैं, निश्चायक कारण. So it gives us the certain knowledge about it, but not in the informatory sense, not in the productive sense. So that is the meaning. Yes, ma'am.
A part of a proposition cannot physically cause the hetu part, cannot physically produce the sadhya part.
Yep.
That is very obvious.
Yeah, that is obvious, ma'am. Yeah. Any other question?
Okay.
Yes.
I just had a sort of a small query. Actually, reminds me of small kind of portion in Nyaya Manjari. Actually, regarding sort of as you rightly said in the beginning, that right knowledge results in right like a fruitful activity. But in Nyaya Manjari, you find a kind of sort of counterexample to it. So, and surprisingly, coming from Buddhist, if I remember it correctly. So, where it is cited, say, for example, at times you may have miscognition of something, and that can also result in fruitful
successful
activity,
action.
successful
Yeah.
activity. Say, for example, you may happen to see mirage somewhere, and you may think, well, there must be some water there, and you approach that place,
Luckily,
and by
we get it.
chance, so like sort of, what kind of answer to that would you find?
Yeah, if I get your question right, sir, you mean to ask that sometimes with the wrong knowledge, we can, approach to we can reach to the successful activity. So in that case also, it should be considered as the right one, because it ultimately leads us to the whatever we were expecting to reach. Is it right?
No, not quite, because then sort of the idea of truth would be in terms of I mean, if fruitful activity is one of the defining features of right cognition, then that is violated, and it is coincidental. Sorry. Achha, oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe you could kind of sort of think about, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure. By chance, if it even then, if we would call it right cognition, that I'm not sure would be the case.
At least Buddhist philosophers would not agree with it. Yeah.
So could I just quickly answer that question? So it's not Artha Kriya by itself is not the definition of Pramana. It's Artha Kriya Sthiti, where Sthiti is basically supposed to be constancy, stability, and things like that. So the thought might be that sometimes you're accidentally successful, but it does not have the right kind of modal profile to be knowledge. That would be the kind of answer. That
Efficacy is supposed to be the constitutive definition of truth.
so it's so Pramanavartika, like 1ABC, it's Arthakriya Sthiti is the definition of Avisanvada, not pure Arthakriya. So that's a subtle distinction which often gets. Yes, yeah.
Something to do with lakshana, the nature of lakshana once again,
Yes,
Let's
sir.
say if I say that this deer has a horn and it is brown, and the deer has a brown horn, which one will be lakshana here? Having brown horn or having horn? No. With Naya Bindu.
Sir,
With Naya Bindu.
Sir, I think in the entire Nyaya Bindu, there is no such discussion. But in the Nyaya Bindu Tika, somewhere they talk about definiendum and definiens, but also the examples are very different. But this question is like red iron hat man in the room. So there is one man, one red hat, one iron in the room, and then we are saying there is one red hat iron man in the room. So whether it would be true or not, so this is another thing to put up, but I don't know how to reply to it.
So
Yes, sir.
many
Thank you
thanks
so
to
much, everyone.
many thanks to all the presenters. I'm really sorry to Dr. Rakesh Singh and Dr. Neeti Singh that they have not been provided sufficient time. And but at the same time, we expected more from Dr. Neeti Singh as well as from Dr. Rakesh Singh. In fact, there is a very much discussion about the Buddhist theory of truth. You know that Dharmakirti and Dharmottara, they propounded, one can say, the pragmatic theory of truth. So you should have better discussed that issue instead of doing a lecture on Buddhist logic here. So we expected more because you are a scholar of Dharmakirti and Dharmottara. So I think we should somehow do justice with the theme of the seminar. The same to Dr. Rakesh Singh. The paper presented by Biplav was excellent. The same can be said about the
Mansi.
So many thanks again, all the speakers as well as the audience. Thank you all.
Thank you, one and all. Now the mic is over to the next convener.
Online. Okay. Okay. He is there. Okay. He has already joined or not? Practice plus. Yeah. Okay. Jha sir is here. Jha sir है? हाँ बुलाइए. हाँ दे. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome you all again in this session, and I request Professor Jha to please come on the dais and take your seat. And it is an honor to welcome two highly accomplished scholars who have made significant contributions to the field of philosophy and religious studies. Before we begin, let me take a moment to introduce them to you. First speaker, Professor Shrikala Nair. Ma'am, please come on the dais and please grace the chair. So, Professor Shrikala Nair is highly respected academic. Who is there? Just two people are there. I request you all to please take your respective seats and please maintain some silence. If the chair will permit, may I formally start the session, sir? Yeah. Thank you, sir. So, we have two speakers today in this session. One is present here in person, and another one, Dr. Sonam Kachru, is there online. So I would like to introduce our first speaker, Professor Shrikala Nair, and then I'll invite ma'am for her talk. So she is highly respected academician in the field of philosophy, and she currently serves as a professor in the philosophy department in Sri Shankaracharya University of Sanskrit. And Professor Nair has previously held the position of professor at Nalanda University and has conducted groundbreaking postdoctoral research on Indian epistemology at the University of Madras. Professor Nair's contribution to academia are immense, and she has received numerous awards, including the ICPR Young Scholar Award and Sri Shastri Indo-Canadian Fellowship. Her work includes the authorship of analysis of knowledge, classical and contemporary approaches, along with over 60 research papers. A passionate academic, she has presented papers in over 200 seminars and conferences worldwide. And Professor Nair will enlighten us on coping with the world. Does Buddhism favor a pragmatic theory of truth? So let us welcome her with warm applause. And I would like to request, ma'am, just a minute, Siley to present a memento to ma'am. Professor, ma'am. Acha, Professor Jha, sir, please facilitate ma'am with a small memento. Thank you so much, sir. So we are fortunate to have you, ma'am. Please come for your talk.
So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Rahulji, for this wonderful occasion. I'm meeting my colleagues after a long time. Heard them great. I apologize for bothering you with a lot of epistemology late in this evening. Please bear with me. So as you see, the title of my paper is Coping with the World. Does Buddhism favor a pragmatic theory of truth? Since its inception, Buddhism has exhibited a strong emphasis and pragmatist orientation, as we have been discussing for past 2 days. Something which is evident from a number of sermons Buddha gave, in which he calls upon his followers to rely on their reasoning based on experience to arrive at its validity. The brightest example of this being his popular denouncing of the varied views of the contemporary metaphysicians at that time in the Anguttara Nikaya. Similar statements can be found throughout Buddha's literature that bear a strong philosophical resemblance to the American radical empiricist tradition initiated by Peirce that emphasizes the primacy of experience. The later thinkers of the school, William James, John Deere, and recently Richard Rorty, have all given primacy to experience and propounded theories of truth which carry praxis as its hallmark. To this extent, pragmatism and the whole bunch of Buddhist literature bear strikingly similar features. Drawing parallels between these two probably started with David Kalupahana, followed by a series of contemporary thinkers like John Pass, Dr. Kamala Kumari in, I think, in Delhi University, it's a PhD thesis, Richard Hayes, and many others. The present paper will try to explore how the logical school of Buddhism has developed a unique metaphysico-epistemic version of the ethical pragmatism that was prevalent in the early Buddhist literature, and further argue that though both pragmatism and the logical school seem alike in subscribing to praxis at various levels, there are significant differences that underlie in their approaches. The Naga in Pramana Samuchaya Vritti as well as Dharmakirti in Nyaya Bindu declare that the only means of valid cognition, as Niti has just said, two, that is one, the direct perception and pratiksha and inference. Dvividham samyajnanam pratyaksham anumanam cha. Sorry, I could not put the diacritical marks. Forgive me for that. So the whole science of epistemology is built upon this foundation of difference between the direct and indirect knowledge. A good look at the Pramanavada, particularly of perception, I suppose. She was focusing on inference, I shall do it on perception, would provide a glimpse of the type of pragmatism they apply in cognition. Hence, let's make a quick travel through the Pradhama Paricheda of Dharmakirti's Nyaya Bindu to initiate a discussion on drawing parallels between these two systems of thought. Now, perception for Dharmakirti is carried at two stages. Pure sensation, which consists in signaling the presence of an object in the, and she spoke about that, followed by the construction of the image of the object, whose presence has thus been reported, which is a work of imagination. Kalpana, she said about Kalpana Vodham Abhrandam to the Sutra, executed by another agency that follows in the track of the first. The object of the direct knowledge is the extreme particular. Tasya Vishayaha Swalakshana. This object is not, as Dharmotara, the Tikakara, observes, something empirically real, but is the indispensable condition of all real and consistent knowledge. It's trans-empirical, but not metaphysical. And he distinguishes it from the routine metaphysical entities like God, other world, and so on and so forth. For instance, if we begin to stare at a patch of color and withdraw all our thoughts on other objects, as we routinely see in perception, like when we see a patch of color, we try to see it in the relational format. So if you wipe off all the relations and reduce our consciousness to a condition of rigidity and become as though unconscious, if you focus on non-relationally focused on an object, then it will become unconscious, and this will be the condition of pure sensation. Consciousness, thus reduced to its extreme poverty, is pure sensation. This pure sensation is followed by an intelligible intuition, which is manovijnana. The sutra is Svavishaya Anandara Vishaya Sahakarina Indriya Jnanena Samanandara Pratyena Janitam Tadu Manovijnanam. Dharmakirti observes that we ordinarily cognize, so this is a beautiful observation. He says, we are confined to this intelligible intuition where there is an object at the other end, conditioned by the presence of the object, or else we would have had omniscience. Swasamvedanam is the third stage where a veridical cognition is confirmed by a subsequent perception, since every awareness is invariably self-conscious. Where he says about the Atma Samvedana, and the example that is given is like a lamp which illumines the neighboring objects and its own self. At the same time, knowledge is self-luminous and enlightens other things. This Swalakshana Pratyaksha, say of water, gets progressively confirmed with a concrete object that bears Ardhasarupya, similarity with the object initially sensed. Ardhasarupyamasya pramanam. Though no particular entity shares its characteristics with anything else, because unique, the particular things are unique. So, Swalakshana is unique in nature, and therefore similarity is something which we impose upon the world. We, for convenience, mark a certain degree of similarity by neglecting their differences. Just as every day I go to the university, I park the car and I'm happy that the car shed looks the similar, the university looks the similar, so that I'm happy so that I can get to my work, ignoring the small changes that have taken place down the time. So thus the perceptual knowledge finally comes forth, projecting the apparent object. Tadevacha pratyaksham jnanam pramana bhalam ardhabratiti rupatvad. Now, this knowledge of the object gets validated by ardhakriya karitva as something useful for empirical transaction. Thus, a pragmatic method seems at function for the validation of perceptual knowledge. A unique particular which is thus apprehended invariably indicates an action or has the ability to produce something. Ardhakriya Samardhya Lakshanatwada Vastunaha Sutra. In brief, the existence of an object is equated with its causal efficacy. Dharmottara points out that the test of reality lies in its potency to produce action, in contrast to an imagined object incapable of purposive action. Just we had a discussion on in the mirage water not being capable of producing, is unable to quench your thirst, so on and so forth. So Dharmakirti in Pramanavartika also asserts Ardhakriya Sthitihi Abhisambhadana. One form of a causal efficacy is the object's capacity to fulfill human desires. But how can we establish an identity between the obtained water? She did again, Niti spoke about that. Between the obtained water and the initial one. Since with the Buddhas, all the objects are in moving and they're momentary. Dhamodara answers this question by pointing out that the water obtained is a member, santani, of a causally conditioned series santana initiated by the momentary water particular, jala swalakshana, initially perceived. Note that only the first moment of perception counts as direct perception, and later moments are referred to as subsequent cognitions, parichinna jnana. So this is because after the initial cognition becomes connected with the conceptual thought as we proceed from the swalakshana to the samanya, due to this conceptual overlay, the perceiver gets associated with the ideas about the object, and this conceptual overlay makes the cognition parichinna. Dinnaga, in fact, works on Vasubandhu's position that two individuals, despite being in the same physical surroundings, would have very different experience, for each is experiencing the cumulative effects of mental habits that have been formed through thousands of births, thousands of individual judgments made previously. Now let me get into the business, drawing parallels between Buddhism and pragmatism. If pragmatism is a theory that meets the criteria of changeability with empirical data and usability as a criterion of truth, it ought to resonate at least some of the epistemic insights of the Pramanikas. In the opening verses of the Pramana Vartika, Dharmakirti indicates that an authoritative cognition must meet three criteria, two of which she has already mentioned. The first is anartha prakashaka, that it must make clear an object that is already unknown. The second is that it must not abhisambadaka, that it must not be controverted, the non-defeasibility condition. And the third is ardhakriyakari, that it must be able to lead to the ability to perform actions. Note that all these criteria refer to the pragmatic concerns. In fact, the principle of non-defeasibility of veridical cognition has been employed by William James as well, where he says that cognition is that which is able to withstand analysis and is corroborated by other relevant informations. The mutually overlapping notions of existence and action is yet another major point where both the schools converge. Existence is work, says Shantarakshita. Action and reality are convertible terms. It's an anthropomorphic illusion to suppose that a thing can exist placidly without acting, and then, as it were, suddenly rise and produce an action, which is not the case. Udyodhakara, very interestingly, Mayayika, criticizing Pramanikas, point out that when they say that something is causal, if something is causally impotent, it may either mean that it is non-existent or it is changeless. To this, Kamalashila's quick reply is that he has failed to understand the Buddhas, his adversaries, because for Buddhas, a non-cause is necessarily a non-reality. Again, both for Pearls and Pramanikas, inquiry from why is it that there is an epistemic inquiry undertaken at all? The very inquiry on the nature of truth originated from their desire to critically analyze experience. And again, in those terms, they have commonality. Both believe that our idea of anything is our idea of its sensible effects, which also bear implications of what we should do with this sensiblia. Further, Peirce's view that a perceptual judgment does not copy its percept, but rather indexes it, just as a weathercock indicates the direction of the wind, is surprisingly indicative of the insights of Buddhas on perception. One feels as if Peirce has undergone a thorough study of Pramana Vartika when he says that although percepts and perceptual judgments are intrinsically dissimilar, habits of association over time between the two leaders link them, which in turn enables percepts and perceptual judgments to mutually inform and correct one another. Just I have explained how the Buddhas think about, the series of the Santana and the Santani. It's precisely that has been discussed by Peirce here. Closely following Peirce, G2 views that our experience is shaped by our habits of expectation. And there is no basis for extracting from this complex process the kind of the thin given, beloved of sense datum theorists. While Buddhas insist that knowledge should be confined to perception and inference, Peirce confirms that the methods of fixing belief are that of the mother of science, which he contrasts with the three then existing methods of fixing belief, that is the method of tenacity, that is going by one's favored beliefs, and the second is the method of authority, that is accepting an institution's dictates or that of the scriptural dictates, and the third is the a priori method, developing the most rationally coherent or elegant seeming belief set. Now, Peirce, this contrasting of the method of science to the method of authority again resonates Dharmakirti's outright rejection of scriptural authority. While Dinaga's little soft with scriptural testimony, Dharmakirti, Professor Gokhale in the morning did say about it. He's very scrupulous with that. And he insists that all scriptural injunctions, including the words of Buddha, should be carefully examined in the light of one's own experience. Both pragmatism and Buddhism alike reject the standard notion that the content of thought is the abstract representation of the object. This is what I was discussing with him in the morning. Instead, they explain it in terms of praxis. Let me bring it to your notice that the contemporary cognitive science, if you are aware of how the embodied theory has been replaced by the computationalist model. Now, the embodied model which speaks about cognition being conceived in terms of the 4E cognition, that is embodied, embedded, enactive, and extended. And I'm sure you are all aware that the Buddhist philosophy has been, a lot of insights are borrowed from the Buddhists as well as the pragmatic theories towards this. Also, Peirce resonating Dharmakirti views that ideas are really rules for action. Existence is nothing but efficiency. Finally, the pragmatists appeal for multiple truths from a peripheral view, at least, is the fact that the pragmatists appeal for multiple truths from a peripheral view, at least, is presumptive of the Buddhist theory of cognition. Though many of James' position on truth are controversial, it's a little difficult because William James is not very systematically presenting theories of truth, and therefore it's hard therefore I'm a little scared to place my hands on James. But nevertheless, some of his views resonate with these notions, though in a very non-technical form. For instance, he identifies truth with consciousness, which is a continuous flux. I quote him, "Consciousness then does not appear to itself chopped up in bits. It is nothing joined. It flows. A stream is the metaphor by which it's most naturally described." And don't tell me that you are not reminded of the Buddha theories. Again, with these insights befall on James when he observes that the truth of an idea is not a stagnant property inherent in it, rather is something that happens to an idea. Its verity is an event, a process. In other words, thought both finds a world and creates one. But of course, we do not have a rigorous metaphysical epistemic analysis of these insights in James as in the case of Buddhists. Now, let me bring to the disparities between these schools, even as they appear to commonly subscribe to pragmatism. Both subscribe to pragmatism, but differently. We have seen Buddha and pragmatists denouncing metaphysical props. But there is an important difference between dismissing a question, a metaphysical question, as irrelevant for a specific purpose, as Buddha did. You know the story of why Buddha has rejected the metaphysical question for specific reason. And dismissing a concept as implying no conceivable difference in action for any purpose, as the pragmatists Peirce did. Note that most of the questions that modern scientists seek to answer would be dismissed by Buddha in no time as irrelevant to the pursuit of nirvana, which are very dear to Peirce. One can hardly imagine anything that would be more pointless to Dharmakirti than study of the sole sake of satisfying one's curiosity, as Peirce would call upon. True, Pramanikas, quite like Peirce, voted for critical analysis of experience, but their goals were different. They're not interested in epistemology in the abstract. I'm talking about the Pramanikas. Their concern is primarily to understand what mental states produce what results. Their goal is definitely soteriological. They're analyzing the experience for different purpose. Since without a correct grasp of what knowledge is, we lag understanding of what to adopt and what to avoid. Further, the difference between Peirce and the Buddhists on what it means for a matter to be pragmatically significant is great enough not to venture much on the comparative mode. They seem so very distant. No matter how meaningless certain scientific questions may be, they are paradigmatically meaningful in Peirce's doctrine of pragmatism. It might not be, it might appear irrelevant and not producing any result, but nevertheless, Peirce would insist on that. But for Buddhists, engaging in a pursuit for knowledge for its own sake is meaningless. For the whole engagement of logic and epistemology is to bring clarity regarding our ways of perceiving and conceiving. None of these are end in themselves, as one of the scholars, I forget the name, say that we wouldn't have done a lot of epistemology had it not been the case that the Nayayikas are giving us all wrong information. That's why we are forced to do epistemology to this extent. So none of these are end in themselves, but sheer means to attain the prime goal, namely nirvana. More significantly, as Buddhist philosophers, Pramanikas have a soteriological focus. They are interested in identifying the causes of mental affliction and suffering, as well as their antidotes, how we can remedy this. Their epistemology seeks to elucidate what sort of mental activity leads to bondage and suffering, and what sort of mental training can counteract them. If human suffering is caused by mistaken ideas about reality, the acquisition of correct understanding can diminish the effects of wrong ideas and can lead to success both in mundane affairs and in religious pursuits. They are identical, in fact. Similarly, for Peirce, I'm drawing the, this is from the side of the Pramanikas. Even from looking from the side, even from approaching the scenario from Peirce, it might look different. For Peirce, a scientist who inquires on truth for its own sake will be paradigmatically different from a Buddhist monk. They might be doing a very good thing, but then that is not science. Who a Buddhist monk who seeks knowledge to make the world a better place to live or to make himself a better person. They're very good, but then that's not science. Science is immoral. For Peirce, in fact, for him, morality is in fact an obstacle for scientific progress, for it tends to preserve tradition. While a scientist is open to new discoveries, the metaphysician places arguments to substantiate his orthodox position. This is his claim. So in this sense, Dharmakirti would be a metaphysician par excellence from the eyes of Peirce. Now, my appeal is the crucial distinction lies in the Indian way of integrating. See, when he looks upon ethics or religion from the Western view, they might place a obstacle in the critical analysis of experience. So the crucial distinction lies in the Indian way of integrating metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics, placing them all in one single basket and making different combinations of it as we have different schools. So in different ways, Peirce, James, and Dewey all argued that experience is everything in cognition, and to that extent they agree with Buddhists. But pragmatists go one step ahead and argue that in direct experience, along with the particular objects, we also perceive the relation between things. Because they say that the directly apprehended universe needs no extraneous trans-empirical connective support, but possesses in its own right even elements of generality. And this is diametrically opposite to what the Pramanikas would claim, because experience never provides the relation between unique particulars. That is something impossible given the nature of selection as well as the conceptual relations. Further, it's one thing to say that the Buddhist theory of cognition incorporates elements of praxis in it, and quite another to say that they subscribe to a pragmatic theory of truth. Let's remember that Pramanikas have a clear notion of truth. They subscribe to coherentism regarding truth analysis in their theory of a dhasamanya, and to praxis at the level of verification. Again, both Peirce and Dharmakirti were critical of our habit to associate sensation with the past. We, from commonsensical position, we think that every sensation invariably is attached to judgment, or to make predictions about the future, assuming that judgment is always present with the sensation, but for different reasons. See, both of them are critical about it, but why do we do it? That's for different reasons. For Peirce, it meant that we approach truth scientifically without biases, while for Dharmakirti, it has metaphysical reasons to view why we fail to view reality from the right perspective. In fact, pragmatists, in their own sense, they are not willing to close off the possibilities of the future. And this is again quite contrary to the position of Pramanikas regarding cognition. Dharmakirti in Nyayabindhu speaks of yogic jnanam. I'm coming to the close. As a variety of perception. Bhudardha bhavana, prakasha, padyantajam, yogi jnanam, and cheti. So in the four varieties, the last is the yogi jnana. So this is not a mystical withdrawal into a higher realm of truth. That it's not that type of yogi jnanam that William James speaks in varieties of religious experience. This is not a mystical withdrawal into a higher realm of truth that transcends the senses. Rather, one is trying to more clearly understand truths and relations that are generally overlooked. Quite like Dharmakirti's yogic perception, of course, we can see that pragmatism too is often being represented as a meditative philosophy by some, as it is supposed to provide a higher grade of clarity. But the yogic jnanam of the Pramanikas is highly sophisticated epistemic method to discern appearance from reality, nothing comparable to the pragmatism. So it's mainly concerned with uncovering underlying patterns and truths that are given in experience that are often overlooked by people who are caught up in the superficial aspects of the perception. Through developing such an analytic insight, one is able to directly comprehend such subtle things as impermanence and selflessness, anatmatva, which otherwise can be known only conceptually. Failure to see reality accurately arises from our habitual carelessness in thinking. It's called ayonijaha manaskajaha. Means we fail to take it to the root cause, ayonijaha. Thinking that fails to be based upon the first causes. And this is precisely what takes place in the Yogi Pratyaksha. So when we conceive objects as complex entities rather than the elements by which they are composed, or when we think about oneself as a whole person, a continuing self, unmindful of the effect of change, this happens. This casual approach towards the given happens. And as a result, misery arises. Most people understand impermanence only by way of gaining a conceptual understanding based on reasoning. This is nothing new. Advaita speaks about it. Nagarjuna speaks about it. A lot of people do speak about this very fact that misrepresentation of what is given is the root cause of misery. But the uniqueness of the Swatantra Vijnanavada is that here a unique method has been proposed by direct perception through a repeated familiarization. Through familiarizing oneself with an object of observation, the need for a mental image is transcended and one's understanding becomes progressively clearer. One becomes more and more deeply aware of realities such as impermanence and selflessness and comes to perceive oneself as a process rather than a stable substance. So there are three stages in the development of yogic direct perception spoken about. In the first stage, you are just have a conceptual grasp of the basic metaphysical principles like the Nairatmyavada or the Kshanikavada, so on and so forth. The second level, a level of wisdom that comes from thinking about the object and becoming familiar with it. And at the third level, you have the application, a stage of clarity in which the object, that is the selflessness and impermanence, etc., is as vivid and unmistakable. The example given is the Karatala Amalaka, quite like the Amala in your Kara. So the goal is to perceive reality as it is, since this breaks the hold of ignorance, which in turn enables the yogic direct perceiver to overcome the cyclic existence. Thus, Dharmakirti assumes that through meditation, one can gradually wean the mind from its inveterate tendency to conceptualize and abstract from lived experience. The habitual tendency to get conceptualized we can get over through focusing, analyzing. And through training one's cognitive apparatus, one can more clearly perceive reality as it is. And this can liberate one from negative, limiting, and self-destructive patterns of thought and behavior. Correct cognition sees things as they are, where objects transmit their true image. Since our mind is constantly changing, this is one positive note. See, once you are initiated into it, says, I think this Dharmotara or the Tikakara, since our mind is constantly changing, all defilements can be eliminated. And when defilements are replaced by the good qualities, they continue to multiply themselves. Once you are onto this process, then no conscious effort is needed. It automatically happens to summer. Arguing along those lines, even if uh, it, so far I've argued that there are apparent similarities as far as pragmatism is concerned. Both seem subscribing to pragmatism, but subsequently we have seen that for very different reasons and very different motivations. So arguing along these lines, even if it may be granted that Buddhism did not anticipate the key features of versus pragmatism, the question might still remain as to how these two systems of philosophy can be compared. I mean, there is a lot of scholarship that has already gone on to it, juxtaposing these two. So is one more successful than the other? Is it that, when we compare two systems, there should be some benefit in it. That is juxtaposing pragmatism to Buddhism. Probably pragmatism is better relieved, or Pramanikavada is better revealed. So what's happening? So this is a question, says Richard Hayes, like, is shoe more successful than umbrella? Evidently, Buddhism and pragmatism involve very different mentalities. The Buddhist mentality would be a poor choice for someone interested in learning for the sheer joy of discovery. As Peirce has said, that we persistently keep or go behind knowledge, and that is the way to progress, and he sees science as the finest method of that. And the scientific mentality would be a poor choice for a person determined to achieve nirvana. I would conclude that though a hierarchical statement would be, overladen, for someone who has a goal-oriented life will invariably look forward to aspire for nirvana as one's soteriological. So, thank you very much.
So I think we can have some questions also. So this is the time for questions and queries from the audience. Yes,
Ma'am, I just wanted to ask you about the pragmatical nature of seeing reality as it is. Like, for example, is it possible to have application of that thing to see reality as it is? Because for a moment we can be empty of thought, but as we go through our days, it's not pragmatically possible to be empty of thought or to be free of defilements or to be free of our cognitive biases throughout our life. So, will you say that seeing reality as it is somewhat objective, or is it pragmatic?
So, are you asking from Peirce's pragmatism or from Pramanikavada?
Peirce,
Like, both, as well as analyzing the given experience, the approach is the same. But Pramanikas are very systematic and very rigorous, while Peirce would say that we need to keep away the biases and systematically train our thinking to the extent that, as you have said, that we will minimize consistently the biases that creep in and influence our analysis of experience. And that is one way of training our cognitive apparatus. Same thing, as you have just heard, has been insisted by the Pramanikas also, but in a very rigorous and logical.
Dr. Nair, in fact, a very generic question, which I think is often asked of Peirce and all the pragmatists, that in this kind of theorization, the notion of truth and reality both become extremely unstable, because at different times, the same individual will actually consider a proposition to be true, and in another circumstance would consider that to be false. So the idea of logical implication and the idea of rigorous epistemology, which you are fairly fond of, goes out of the window. And short of that, and this would be the case even in your interpretation of the pluralities that you seem to celebrate with the reference to the Pramanikas as well. So how would you deal with that? Because this is a position there in Peirce, this is also a position there in James, and it becomes much worse by the time you come to Dewey.
Thanks, Rakesh, as he has rightly said, that I've been working on Nyaya for quite some time, which is a very comfortable position where you know how to preserve your propositions and stay neatly within that. But this is very challenging, as and one has to be very daring to travel along with Bauddhas, particularly the Pramanikas. But masters are here, so let me not speak much. But to be representationalist and to have prepositions is very easy and systematic. The floor is very plain, hard, while this is very slippery, and there are several metaphysical presuppositions attached, tagged along with epistemic positions, and you will have to buy first that in order to move ahead. I totally agree with the slipperiness, but of course you'll have to pay for this, trotting on the slippery floor. But nevertheless, great reward awaits you, and that is one of the reasons why I've chosen. Yes. Yeah.
It might be a risk that because of the instability of the notion of truth, the guidance for moral action might also suffer. Because in all other cases, you would get a clearer guidance, which may be dogmatic, so to say, but yet it will be clearer. But this occasion and person to person or same person's getting truth differently would also lead to different actions being considered right. And for that, there must be big, heavy ethical caveats.
Thanks for that. Again, I do not know whether you buy my theory. Ethics, is it? Uh, See, in Indian philosophy, this is something which I've been holding, that ethics is something that has been placed within the basket of metaphysics, that we do not have ethics per se. You are ethical because of certain metaphysical positions that you subscribe to. So it is not that you have 10 commandments and then you normatively subscribe to that. And that has been evident even in Bhagavad Gita, for instance. Take the easiest word. And that is the case with Advaita Vedanta. See, everywhere, tell me one single school which doesn't place ethics within the metaphysics. So, yes, there is, as Lord Krishna has beautifully said, there is no common norms applicable to everybody. So it is one situational, how you have been placed in a particular situation that demands, that is one. And the way you are placed in a specific metaphysical ladder that determines your ethical obligations and how you ethically react. So one needn't have common ethical norms. And I don't know, do you agree with me? Anybody can count on me for that. I'm placing, this is my conviction, I've gone through text after text and then see that I fail to see an independent standing for ethics other than metaphysics. So my theory is that metaphysics is the first philosophy. Mhm.
Ma'am, I also wanted to ask a similar kind of question as asked by Professor Chandra. So, suppose for a thought experiment, like there is an event in the Mahabharata when event happens that when person says Aswathama Hato, that Aswathama is dead now. This particular thing leads to an action. So, would Buddhist claim that according to the Artha Kriya Karit, this particular event is Sat? And what about the Western pragmatist, like whether classical or the new, whether they would agree with this point, whether this particular thing is true? Because sometimes we try to compare Artha Kriya Karitva with the pragmatism. So if that is really not the case, that false assumptions cannot lead to the truth, then how can we compare Artha Kriya Karitva with pragmatism? This is my question.
You're mixing up too many things. We can mix one or two things, but multiple mixing is not permitted. See, Ashwadhama Hataha Kuncharaha, where I will just answer from within the larger ethical parameters, nothing to do with Buddhism. See, Mahabharata is a text that's filled with contextualizing ethical principles. For instance, I'll tell you one instance in Mahabharata where Bhima was beating up Duryodhana below the waist. Then Balarama walks off saying that, no, this is not right. And he is angry and then he walks off. And then Krishna, Krichrena, with difficulty he stands there because he knows pretty well that is wrong. And there is a lot of contextualizing of the ethical principles that is happening in Mahabharata, and that has nothing to do with Arthakriya Karitva, is a very epistemic kind of an exercise. That has nothing to do with that.
So we have one more paper. Dr. Sonam Kachru, who could not come because his papers were not clear at the consulates. So he will be delivering online. I think he has already joined. Hello, Dr. Kachru. I think it must be morning there. So welcome you to this international conference. Can you hear me?
Thank you. I can hear you perfectly. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yeah, so let me quickly introduce you and then you can begin your presentation. So Dr. Kachru is an assistant professor at the Department of Religious Studies, Yale University. He was former assistant professor at the University of Virginia, Department of Religious Studies from 15 to 22. He completed his PhD from University of Chicago Divinity School in 2015. He was junior fellow at the Max Planck Institute for History of Science, Berlin. He did his bachelor and master's from University of Georgia. Apart from this, he has been recipient of various fellowships and honors. So welcome you, Dr. Sonam, to this platform. Please deliver your paper, and you will have 30 minutes for presentation and 10 to 15 minutes for deliberation. You can choose accordingly. Yeah, thank you. Please go ahead.
Please give me just a sec while I select. I'd like to share my PowerPoint. It seems like it's. I'm sorry about this. You know what? It seems like I cannot share my PowerPoint. Is it okay if I speak without one? Is it okay if I deliver the paper without a PowerPoint? It doesn't seem to be allowing me to share this my slides. Would that be okay?
Hello.
Hi.
I think you will be able to share your PowerPoint. They have allowed you to make your PowerPoint display.
Oh, okay. Oh, right. Thank you. Just popped up. Thank you.
Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you. And sorry for the delay. Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Moria, for inviting me. And thanks to Dr. Anand Vaidya for having, I think, shared my name in connection with this wonderful conference. I wish I could be there, not least because I wish to learn from all the wonderful Kalyana Mitras that I have known, and Kalyana Mitras in the sense of not just friends, but teachers, and those I could have met for the first time at this historic campus. Okay, conversations about Buddhism and pragmatism can be motivated historically. William James and Charles Sanders Peirce, as their correspondence indicates, thought about Buddhism in connection with ethics. B.R. Ambedkar studied with Dewey, and this, as the work of Mirananda and Scott Stroud has shown, is not unconnected with his consequential way of studying the history of Buddhism and his consequential way of being Buddhist in the 20th century. And this is something that all of you have been discussing now for some time and will continue to discuss. I'm saying nothing new. While there is a lot to be learned from such connections, my interests today lie elsewhere, in what might be called homegrown Buddhist pragmatism with a small p, and not pragmatism with a capital P. I'll reserve the latter unmarked for what Cheryl Mizek has called America's homegrown philosophy or family of philosophical views. Now, I have to tell you that much of what I will say is a mere footnote to Professor Nair's wonderful, wonderful presentation that you just heard, and I'm very grateful to her for having set the stage and allowing me to be a very minor voice accompanying and not taking center stage. What I'm interested in really is in an arc that she herself described, wherein you can find small p pragmatisms right from the beginning of the Buddhist scriptures, and then shading into something in the Buddhist epistemological traditions that developed after the 6th century in Sanskrit, which you could call Buddhist pragmatism with a capital P, keeping in mind a conversation or a comparison with American homegrown pragmatism. Now, I'll have very little to add or to provide or to say that will be new, and so by the criterion of pramanas for Buddhists, presumably this lecture does not count as having anything interesting to teach you. But if there is something to take away, I think it'll be something like this. There is a way to see the history of Buddhist epistemology as moving from pragmatism with a small p, a dictionary sense of the concrete and the practical, to something more technically resonant with American pragmatism. But as that happens, as we get a more technical sense of pragmatism, perhaps we will also get a more ironic commitment to such pragmatism. At least this is where I will end up. Now, in everything I say, I am not at all an expert on any of the material I'll be presenting, neither on the American side nor on the Shastric side with Buddhist epistemology. There are many experts among you today. So what I'm saying is really in the spirit of conversation starters. And it's designed to just get us talking and basically give me an opportunity to learn from all of you. But I'll begin with a small p pragmatism. I want to begin with the Buddha's illustration. That is, he's providing as an illustration the following: the desire for the most beautiful girl in the world. In the Tevijja Sutta, Vaseta and Bharadvaja, two philosophy students, two Brahmins, are debating what is and what is not a path, what counts as a path, and whether theirs and their philosophical tradition is the only one which leads to the right destination, a certain kind of felicity. The dispute gets unresolved, and they go on to see the Buddha to provide some help. And after a little questioning, the Buddha thinks there is a more fundamental problem, and he provides the following illustration, one of several. So this is the one I want to focus on though. Suppose a man were to say, whoever the most beautiful girl in the world is, it is her that I want, her that I desire. They'd say to him, Mister, that most beautiful girl in the world whom you desire, do you know whether she's an aristocrat, a Brahmin, a peasant, a menial? And ask this, he'd say, no. And then they'd say to him, Mister, that most beautiful girl in the world whom you desire, do you know her name or clan, whether she's tall or short, black, brown, tawny, what village, town, or city she comes from? And he'd say no. And they'd say to him, Mister, do you desire someone whom you've never even known or seen? And he'd say yes. K.N. Jayatilake famously took this to offer a criterion of meaning continuous with logical positivist verificational criteria. He took it that the Buddha was saying that the phrase and the attitude implied by desiring the most beautiful girl in the world was meaningless. And by quote unquote meaninglessness, he was inspired by the Buddha's asking Vaseta, doesn't that man's statement turn out to have no demonstrable basis? The Buddha was qualifying talk, what was said, bhasitam, and he was saying of it that it was apati hirikatam. But the Buddha was not formulating a thesis of meaning, nor is the meaning of apati hirikatam unverifiable in a technical sense. The Buddha was thinking of evidentiary relations and not semantic ones. As George Chatelain has convincingly shown, the complaint with this and with the family of illustrations, such as the highest color or building a ladder to a building one has not seen, invariably is that a person is ignorant of what he is talking about, and the complaint is that he has an attitude towards something he cannot provide evidence for. In fact, whether one can ask for one cannot ask for evidence for what one believes to be truly meaningless, suggesting that the Buddha did not in fact think of his illustrations as exhibiting a kind of that thesis associated with logical positivism. The concern, rather, seems to be this: calling into question whether someone knows something or has any acquaintance with it or evidence for it is of interest here in a particularly practical manner. To use something which one has no evidence for to formulate action-guiding attitudes or projects is a problem, not only because of the failure of formulating an attitude in advance of evidence, say on the basis of hearsay rather than direct experience. The question is not quite this. The problem, rather, is that one could not be sure of being directed at any particular object at all. And because the lack of specification, there is then no way to claim satisfaction of one's actions entailed by the attitudes in question. Say, there's no way to say that I've actually met with the most beautiful girl in the world I claim to have desired. The Buddha emphasizes the practical aspects of this problem at the beginning and the end of his illustration, summing up his lesson by asking Vaseta whether or not he thought such talk of desiring the most beautiful girl in the world was baseless, and getting Vaseta's consent that it is, and saying to that consent, "Good, Vaseta," and I quote, "for it is impossible that they should reach something or teach a path to that which is neither known or seen." Call this small p pragmatism. I submit that it exhibits what one might call a dictionary sense of the pragmatic, with an emphasis on the concrete and the practical. But there is a sense in which it might involve more than simply a dictionary emphasis on the concrete, for it involves an attitude that was important to the American variety of homegrown capital P pragmatism as well. Here's how we can see it. The Buddha is not inventing his small p pragmatism. Rather, he elicits it in conversation as something like common sense from Vaseta. What is interesting is that he gets Vaseta to agree and to make explicit and to agree on a principle in what does and does not make sense in the context, in connection with action and commitments to projects. And two, and this is the important part, he extends the common sense commitments to talk of transcendent concerns, situating talk of ultimate felicities within the environs of the world of human experience, of experience. In that sense, attitude shares a lot with that half ironic and half defiant sense in which Peirce and other members of the Metaphysical Club intended to bring metaphysics down to earth, and it shares a lot with their way of doing so. But it is not enough to say that we should set human experience and practical effort as constraints on the sense it makes to take up certain attitudes and projects. For the capital P pragmatists in Cambridge were also interested in setting constraints on the concepts with which philosophers typically have articulated their ideas, their toolkit, and their description of what agents, what constitutes the mental life of agents. Thus, as Charles Sanders Peirce said, concepts such as belief in truth should not be vagabond thoughts which tramp public roads without human habitation. The Buddha indeed asked the Brahmins, Vaseta and Bharadvaja, not to let their desires and their goals take on the appearance of the concrete without exhibiting or manifesting their sense in a public way. But without examining the idea of desire, belief, knowledge fully, or even the notion of evidence, we cannot get a sense of capital P pragmatism. But this is where the history of Buddhist epistemology does in fact lead. All right, now I'm going to set this up with a few things that you already know and you've heard discussed both in lectures. I'm sure, given the titles that I've seen, you've seen this in Professor Nai's wonderful presentation. And I even heard a bit of it in Nilanjan's comments and his characteristically astute comments to a paper before this session. So bear with me when we do a little bit of setup, and I hope that the payoff will be interesting. So I want to begin by crediting a long-standing interest on the part of scholars in finding in Buddhist epistemology an analog to capital P pragmatism. So we're looking at the tradition that developed around the works of Dignaga and Dharmakirti, And when comparative philosophers have considered whether it is fair to say that there is something pragmatic, and now we're beginning to move from a dictionary sense of pragmatic to a more technical sense, when they're thinking about whether Buddhist epistemology is pragmatic, they're thinking about truth and justification and the ways in which Buddhist philosophers deal with these as tools of philosophical art, as well as elements in the life of a rational agent. And typically, but not exclusively, we have looked at the criterion of Artha Kriya Sthiti and Artha Kriya more loosely. Notoriously, in that compound, Artha Kriya can have two senses: that of causal efficacy on the part of some concretum, and the sense of the accomplishment of a practical goal, and how these align or not can be very complex. For now, to set us up, just remember, as Pascal Hougon puts it, that on either interpretation of the compound, it points to a view that epistemic instruments in our conventional transactional life as agents in a social world are primarily oriented towards human activities and aims, and hence bear on objects capable of bringing about the objectives intended by agents. In saying this, Pascal is basically echoing Dharmakirti's way of explaining the link between epistemic means of knowledge and successful action, the avoiding of what one does not want and the obtaining of what one does, and also Dharmakirti's way of demarcating the scope of epistemology as a field of study, as Professor Nair, was pointing out at the end. When we are inquiring into knowledge, we are setting our sights on what has the capacity to fulfill the purposes of rational agents. Now this gets complex because Dharmakirti's way of setting the scope of his inquiry at the beginning of the Pramanavartika may not be complete, or it may not survive certain modifications that he introduces over the course of the work, and he himself begins to inquire into objects of knowledge that do not satisfy the narrow senses of causal efficacy or the ability to fulfill goals, when he deals with non-existent objects, and etc., etc. And things can get very difficult when you begin to inquire not just into the epistemic instruments that constrain our life as agents in the social world, but also ask, say, maybe for ultimate epistemic instruments, or the way things look when we're interested in how things finally at the end of the day are, and that can get very, very complex. For now, I'd like to point out and seize on what's been already pointed out and discussed so far, that conversation about Buddhist epistemology and pragmatism has typically been oriented by a concern with whether we find in Buddhist epistemology something like a Jamesian criterion for truth, the pragmatic criterion of truth. There is also a pushback against this amongst more recent scholarship to say that what we find in Dharmakirti is not so much a pragmatic criterion of truth as a pragmatic criterion of the reliability of epistemic episodes of awareness that count as knowledge or cognition, in the sense that a means of knowledge is an awareness event which does not mislead, and what that means, it contributes in a stable way to the accomplishment of practical goals, and that's a criterion not for truth, but pramanya. So maybe it's safer to say that there is reason to be interested in the conversation, the link between pragmatism and with a capital P, American style, and Buddhist pragmatism, P, capital style, but that we are, rather than mapping exact concepts, we're in a domain of concern where truth begins to recede a little bit in the picture, and issues like justification, reliability, or other concepts come to the fore, and that itself would be a reason to begin comparing them. But what I want to talk about is a slight puzzle that emerges for me in my own thinking about this, when one wants to set up a comparison between Buddhist pragmatism with a capital P, where we have the language of linking the reliability or epistemic value of certain kinds of cognitive elements to pragmatic function, and American style pragmatism. Okay, and I ask you to remember that Artha Kriya can have two senses. It can function as a criterion of existence, on which to exist is to perform a causal function, and it can function in connection with a pragmatic epistemic constraint, according to which epistemic validity or the value of some epistemic instrument is exhibited through social transaction and praxis or experience through vyavahara. And I'm echoing here Dharmakirti's language in the second chapter of the Pramana Vartika. The minor problem I would like to flag, the minor puzzle, I guess it's not a problem, when thinking of Buddhist pragmatism with a capital P, and you're thinking about whether Buddhist pragmatism with a capital P is in the neighborhood of American pragmatism with a capital P, is this. Is there anything specifically Buddhist that is also something like, that is also pragmatist in the technical rather than in the dictionary sense of pragmatism? The trouble is that the first meaning, the metaphysical one, is or could be taken to be distinctively Buddhist. But when you lean on that, you move away from American-style pragmatism because you're shading into metaphysical commitments. On the other hand, if you lean on the second, there are two kinds of problems. If you lean on the sense of a Buddhist epistemic, a commitment to an epistemic constraint, you run up against the following thoughts. For one thing, the Nyaya already have commitments to something in the neighborhood of the pragmatic epistemic thought. Vatsyayana begins his commentary on the Nyaya Sutras by saying, successful activity results when the object, the artha, is cognized by a pramana, an instrument of valid knowledge, and the pramana is invariably connected with the object. There is no cognition of an object without a pramana, and without a pramana, there is no successful activity, and he goes on to cash out the effortful activity an agent engages in, much the way that Dharmakirti talks about practical efficacy. The second question, so one of the things I would like to ask is it really that the Buddhists are offering a pragmatic epistemic account, an account of epistemology in pragmatist terms, or is Indian epistemology itself, in the way in it's framed, something closer to pragmatism of an American style? And I'll say why in a second. The second point to worry about is that the account on which there is a pragmatist leaning discussion of validity or epistemic instruments belongs to a language of ourselves as agents in a social world that may be glossed as convention rather than ultimately true. So it may not be something that a Buddhist can ultimately commit to as a final account. And that too starts suggesting a certain kind of tension within American pragmatism. Okay. Let me say very quickly that whether or not one wants to take the line that there is something distinctively Buddhist that is pragmatic in a capital P sense or not, I think it is salutary to consider the degrees to which Indian epistemology is formulated as a discourse about weighting the mental life of agents, the mental events in the life of an agent in terms of epistemic weight, contribution to knowledge, and as motivation to action. That very way of framing the issue does suggest a lot that is continuous with American pragmatism's way of paying attention to the concreteness of the concreteness of knowledge in the life of persons. There's a way in which American pragmatism was born by taking experience as a concrete fact in the world seriously, and something that attention to in a way attention to mental action and mental episodes and its causal link to successful activity is already to take us several yards down the field towards the goal that we're looking for. Is a conversation with American pragmatism. There's a lot more to get very technical about that we would have to achieve. What I would like to suggest is a way of pushing that conversation are two more specific ways in which I find it useful to think of American pragmatism in connection with Buddhist epistemology. And I'd like to just say quickly as we go along, I think these provide, I'm not going to provide a historical account on which one follows the other. I'd like to sketch out a space of possible forms of Buddhist pragmatism, of which I think there are many that develop in commentaries to Dharmakirti's work, and which cash out very different kinds of ways to relate concepts that he sketches out and to evaluate certain kinds of claims that he offers. So there's nothing at all exhaustive here and very, very tentative. I'd like to talk about two varieties of Buddhist pragmatism, or pragmatist elements. And one of them is a lesson I learned from Dharmottara, and one of them will be from Prajnakaragupta. And just to suggest a path of where we're going, as we get these more technical senses, more technically grounded connections between American pragmatism and Buddhist epistemology, we might also, by the end of our conversation with Prajnakaragupta, be providing a more ironic commitment to those elements that allow us to think about pragmatism in connection with Buddhism. Right? That's sort of where I'd like to end. You'll see why. Okay, the first lesson, however, I apologize, that was supposed to go up earlier. I'm going to provide an answer, two possibilities to answer this question. I think the answer is yes. There is a distinctively Buddhist pragmatist tendencies in the following way. We'll first see Mr. Dharmottara. And what I see in Dharmottara that is reminiscent to me of one of the central lessons of American style pragmatism is the link between the individuation of mental kinds and action. So it's not just that there is a causal link between a mental episode that counts as an epistemic event, an epistemically salient event, and an action that follows it. There's also a kind of a conceptual link that guides the theorist in picking out and fixing what the mental kind is and fixing the notion of content, fixing the content. So this is where it goes beyond the Nayayika way of framing the subject of epistemology as a topic that intrinsically brings together action, knowledge, and object. We're going to specify what it means to be a mental event, not by grounding it in the notion of an object, but by using the concept of an action to help us fix the contribution made by the mental event. And here's to sloganeer what you could say. The affordances of action help us fix the nature of mental events. Consider that Frank Ramsey's inheritance from Peirce amounted to saying this: the content of a belief is fixed by the action to which it gives rise. On behalf of Dharmottara, I want to say the lesson of Dharmakirti's pragmatist impulses is this: the meaning of mental content and the mental structures involved in having content is revealed by its link to action in the following way. Oh, I should also say, in making this case, Dharmottara, interestingly, he's not uncommitted to a causal criterion, but he's leaning on the sense of artha kriya as the fulfillment of a purpose, this forward-looking practical sense. And so there's an interesting link that's going on. But for Dharmottara, we see this right at the beginning, and I'm going to give you just a sketch of what it looks like with the case of perceptual awareness. There's a link between knowing X and the action connected with X to which knowing X gives rise. To say that X is known becomes, on Dharmottara's account, to say that X is obtained or reached, which is to say that X is brought into view in a particular way, which is to say that X is shown to be the aim, the purpose of action. So the concept of an object gets reoccupied epistemologically in this theory by the idea of the aim of a purpose of action. And this can happen in different ways. So this is a structural way of putting the point, but this can be sketched out and filled out in different ways for what would be a perceptual mode of apprehension as opposed to an inferential mode. And then you can specify the links between the way in which these link up to action in different ways as well. So I'm going to phrase it in a slightly abstract way. To talk about, so you're allowing the idea of an action to reach into the notion of content, back into the notion of content, and repurpose it. Now, this might seem like a recoil from pragmatism because it goes from action in the world back inside the mind. But however, it revolutionizes the notion of mind and mental content. The content now is not a static object, but an actionable thing, something not given, but something which comes into view as an aim. At the same time, the mental act that is related to this content is not analytically speaking simple, but is to be represented as an achievement of a process entailed by epistemically registering content. Now, however one refines these elements, the idea is that neither perception nor inferentially articulated thought are mere have their content merely given to them. And the way in which we articulate what those mental structures or mental processes involved has to really robustly be analyzed as a process with the help of vocabulary that would typically be used to describe action in the world, or the procedures or the processes of action, the temporal structures, parts, ends, termini, and even fruit. And that can happen in complicated ways. And there are many, many details to certain how we resolve such talk with Buddhist commitments to episodic nature of reality. But the point is that when we're talking about mental content and our mental process, we are describing them with the vocabulary of action and allowing the forward-looking concern with action to guide what gets picked out from the mental life of an agent as epistemically salient. Okay, we're almost done with the talk. Now that strikes me as a significant variety of Buddhist pragmatism, a variety of Buddhist pragmatism. It's not the only variety of Buddhist pragmatism, and there are many non-pragmatic elements maybe in Dharma's thinking, but it is a variety of Buddhist capital P pragmatism. And for me, particularly because of willingness to follow through the consequences of internalizing a dependence of content and mental structure on the concept of action. Okay. Right? So there's two things to get clear on, and this is me just now. I'm not settled on any of this. This is sort of a first pass. We're linking up the idea of content to what can show up in action, and the concept of action is guiding the revision of the concepts of mental apprehension or mental event, etc. Right? So there are two kinds of ways in which action is guiding the redescription of epistemically salient awareness. Okay, but you can ask now, has Dharmottara, brilliant as his revolution of Buddhist epistemology is, has he done justice to the pragmatist intuitions, whether Buddhist or not? Is he doing justice to that? He's still thinking in terms of a description of the mental life of an agent, sideways on, in terms of causes and events. There's still a kind of a commitment to the present moment. And we can ask whether he has successfully resolved or done justice to the tension between like what we call the criterion of reality and the pragmatic epistemic constraint. The reason I'm even asking this question is because of what another Buddhist philosopher does with Dharmakirti, and this is Prajnakara Gupta. And here I have to say that a lot of what I'm about to say will look very different once I have a chance to read forthcoming work by Nilanjan Das. He's with you today, and should really be treated as the guru in this. In his work with Davy Tomlinson and Kat Pruitt on Prajnakara Gupta's response to the causal criterion, the ostensibly causal criterion of reality. What I would like just to say in a very short compass is this from Prajnakara Gupta. He's going to help me formulate what I think of as an ironic Buddhist pragmatism in the following sense. Okay. Consider this. What do you make of the status of that which has been turned, the content I said in Dharmottara has been turned into an opportunity for action, something forward-looking, what must be ascertained, what must be brought about, what must be linked to the fruit of action. These are all gerundives or forward-looking, future-oriented characterizations. What do we do about that? That not yet, that characterizes what it means to link the content to an action. For Prajnakara Gupta, the intuition, the striking intuition, the way of bringing home what we might call the pragmatist thrust of Buddhist philosophy and Buddhist epistemology is this. I quote Patrick McAllister his gloss on what Prajnakaragupta is doing with a moment in the Pramana Ministry and the Pramana Vartik. Here's Patrick McAllister. Dharmakirti claimed that the object of a means of valid cognition at the end of the day is just one. There is just one prameya. Mayantu ekam svalakshan. Prajnakaragupta here explains that the particular that Dharmakirti means is the future particular, not the one present at the time of awareness. At the end of the day, the particular that we are interested in Buddhist epistemology is just one, and that one particular is future. It is the one that we obtain by acting upon a cognition that is a means of valid cognition. Okay. Now, this generalization of Dharmakirti's point feels orthogonal to Dharmottara's in various ways, and getting clear on how Prajnakaragupta would point by point could be compared to his compatriot Dharmottara's presentation of Buddhist epistemology can take a long time. For me, I just want to focus for us just on 2 points. This is another way of seizing on a deep commitment of American style, and even actually not just the American Cambridge style pragmatism, but also the British Cambridge style pragmatism that was its heir, say in the work of Frank Ramsey. But Prajnakaragupta, to do justice to the reliance on action and formulating epistemic validity, is to draw our attention out of the present, out of them, and so out of the mind. If you're going to think in terms of action, you've got to think about the future. Now hold on to that if, okay? It's going to come back in a minute. There's a conditional there. Frank Ramsey, the modern heir to Peirce's pragmatism, thought that a belief is a habit or rule, as you heard Professor Nair mention, with which we meet the future. And this is something I think that Prajnakaragupta could very well be made to say, something like this. Okay. This allows us to begin to put these things together. Remember the small p pragmatism I offered on behalf of the Buddha at the beginning, a way of embedding us as agents in a social world with commitments to each other to exhibit the sense of our claims and our commitments. And think of Prajnakaragupta's way of cashing out the pragmatic epistemic constraint. Rational agents, as you know, he reminds his interlocutor, aim their sights on the existence or non-existence of some particular thing, insofar as it is capable of satisfying their practical aims. Right? This is how Professor Nair also ended by talking about.
True. I request you to kindly try to summarize and conclude in 5 minutes, maybe.
Oh my goodness, 2 minutes. We're done. We're almost done. Thank you, sir. So let's say this is a way of capturing the arc of what we've been talking about. That insofar as we think of ourselves as agents, and we think of ourselves as having commitments to reasons for our action that we share with others, we are going to think of something along the lines of pragmatism. But I asked you to hold an if. If we think of us of action in connection with the mind, we have to think of the future, Prajnakaragupta said. But now I want to think about that if. Prajnakaragupta's way of emphasizing futurity, and in that way coming closer to one of the deeper consequences of pragmatism as a way of thinking about ourselves and our epistemic life, might be conditional in the following way. It actually might be conditional and, in a sense, mildly ironic, possibly tragic in the following way. If we are thinking of activity and action and our place in the social world, we are thinking of ourselves as goal-possessing rational agents. But to know might be cashed out this way, but it may also not exhaust ways of thinking about what it means to be the kinds of beings we are. The contrast Prajnakaragupta might recommend at the end of the day is not between perception and conception or inference. And it's not between even necessarily being confined in the present and being drawn out in the future in action. Instead, we might have to distinguish portraits of ourselves as agentive in a social world and ourselves as knowers in a very different key, as conscious rather than as perceivers, where perception here is linked to action. What do I mean? I mean, we might be able to seize ourselves in a certain way from the inside in experience, in a way freed from the structure of persons with social goals and the pressures of rationalization of activity. Buddhist pragmatism with a capital P suggests that insofar as we are agents, our epistemic life is bound up with the constraints that pragmatism does well to cash out. But are we only ever active agents? Prajnakaragupta's arguments against the causal criterion of reality and his way of making sense of self-awareness, of the self-intimation, a mode of experience that does not necessarily is not necessarily constrained by the pragmatic criteria I've been providing, might suggest that there is a way to take us out of the domain of action and temporal structure of the kind I've been talking about altogether. On the other hand, that suggests that we have a question, right? What would the reasons be for our staying with the present, or presence, I should say, in conscious experience and allowing the structure of goals and reasons to drop out? In fact, the structure of any distinction, in Prajnakaragupta's account, to have so much as a distinction between one thing and another is to be placed in, is to draw on capacities whose account requires to place persons in a social world in the way we've been describing. So on the one hand, we could think of ourselves in that way, as whose criteria of intelligibility is given in these ways that we have made sense of, or we can think of ourselves or have a taste of experience in an entirely different way, where distinction, action, and structure falls away. And the question is, why would we have reason to orient ourselves one way or another? And what is the structure of that? Is that a choice? Are they complementary or what? And this is all things I put to you as questions. I don't know, and I know many of you do, and I look forward to hearing from you on this. Thank you.
Professor, for your nice presentation. Now the floor is open for questions and queries. Yes, ma'am.
Thanks, Professor, for your very, illuminating talk. My question pertains to at the very outset, you made a comment about pragmatism has to resist very responsibly, the meaninglessness or the contentlessness, and it may be regarding my lack of conception of Swarakshana. I just wanted to ask that so far as the Buddhists go down to Swarakshana, which are actually limits of space, limits of time, and it cannot be unpacked in any kinds of agential space. And it is like that uncashable superlativity that you talked about as most beautiful woman, something like absolute space. Space at the end of all space, which is, which is static. So it may be, as I told you, that it may be my complete misconception about Swarakshanas, but doesn't the conception of Swarakshana go down to as far as it goes down to the limits of space and limits of time, fragmented as if separated by non-space and non-time? Does it go down to that kind of uncashable emptiness as the most beautiful woman? That is my question. Yeah.
What a beautiful question. Actually, is Professor Nair still at the table? I wanted to connect with the way in which she cashes out the notion of a Svalakshana. In her slides, she had the phrase that it is trans-empirical, but not, was the phrase it was not metaphysical, but trans-empirical?
Yeah, I did see that. Yeah, right. You're right.
So, I mean, I actually, if we can set it up as a conversation, I would love to hear, because I think there are certain models of what the Svalakshana is doing. So there's a question of what it is, and then the role it is playing epistemologically in the system. And it's hard to give a single characterization of Svalakshana that does justice to the entire commentorial space that develops around it and captures the discussions that we're having. I think it's a beautiful question to ask, to subject the very idea of a Svalakshana to the kind of test that the Buddha and the Tevijja Sutta recommends that we ask of anything. I think that at least by the time of Dharmottara, the way that he is repurposing the notion of the role that a Svalakshana plays, it would not be guilty of what talk of the most beautiful woman in the world or the highest color is, partly because of its being linked as a condition of experience and then being fulfilled, as it were, through the course of the experience and met with in action downstream. So it becomes like one of a phase, right? So that way of thinking about it, I think, makes it more intelligible than with something entirely ineffable and completely outside the scope of any traffic. But I would like to hear what Professor Nair means by trans-empirical, actually, a little bit more. Because I find there that idea of something that constitutes but is not given an experience very, very interesting. Because it complicates what we mean by something being experiential, right?
Thanks for your answer.
So thank you so much, sir, for your good presentation. I found some worry regarding the mirroring reality through perception. If you know, if I am perceiving something like that, my awareness is absent of. That means I'm getting some distinction between awareness and consciousness and conceptuality. That means I'm perceiving something, making a distinction between awareness and conceptuality. That means I'm not able to conceptualizing. That means some sort of distinction is maintaining. So how do I recognize the reality?
So this is I mean, like the $1 million question, but are you asking what I personally think or how any of these people would answer it? So no, I actually, yeah, I do mean to ask, do you mean to say, like, how would I personally, how am I philosophically inclined to think about the distinction between something like perception and something like a conceptually or inferentially inflected mode of awareness? Or are you asking, like, how either Dharmottara or Prajnakaragupta or maybe Dharmakirti in one of his many moods, how he would, are you asking, like, so how would you like me to situate that,
Yes.
the answer?
Yes. Yes. It is very simple. That means I am attempting to mirrorize the reality through perception. But at the moment, I am maintaining some gap between my consciousness and my conceptualization of the thing. So
What
how
does it
do
look
you
like
situation,
in that
or
gap?
how Buddhism dealing this situation?
Oh my goodness, that's a conversation for 600 years. One of the things, so let me, like, I know it's frustrating to answer everything by saying that there's a vast scope for different ways of framing it, but let me suggest, I think what is a useful way of framing it is the reception of Dharmakirti. Like, so we begin Buddhist epistemology by what seems to be not necessarily an intuitive, but at least an intelligible and motivated distinction between these two modes, perceptual awareness and something like thought, or something that has a structure of conceptually inflected way of having content. And we think that there's a distinction, and then we think that there maybe we even understand the weight. But what what happens over time is that it becomes both the distinction and the weight of the distinction destabilize. It's not clear how, if at all, we are to distinguish perception and thought, and how, if we do successfully distinguish it, we are to weigh the distinction between perception and thought. For example, it's with Dharmottara, right? It's not true that perception is entirely without capacities that are reminiscent or are shared by inferentially inflected awareness. For a perceptual apprehension to be complete, for it to serve the purpose which we saddle perception with, it needs to, there's a great phrase in Dharmottara, right? Ride the chariot of Vikalpa. It needs to draw on the processes and capacities that we would identify in other contexts, actually as even rumination, never mind inference. We would say that that's what we're doing when we're imagining. But so you see what I'm saying? So it can become. I think the question would be, what would it look like for you to be able to maintain a distinction in the moment, or in a neighborhood of very small moments between perceiving and apprehending something? Actually, that's a question back I would ask. Do you feel that that's a phenomenologically intuitive? Is that a reconstructed difference? Is that something you think could be made evident downstream?
It seems to be like that.
Well, that's a very, very interesting distinction. I think for again, I'm sorry, Nilanjan, I keep putting you on the spot, but for someone like Prajnakara Gupta, if there's even the hint of a difference, right, it's not truly, in a sense, does not partake of the kind of self-presence of consciousness, swasamvedana, which would ultimately be the thing you could describe as awareness implicative, rather than having drawing on capacities and structures that make it more continuous with, or more mixed in a way. I don't know. This is a very good question. I don't know that I've ever just perceived something without having at least structure, if not the capacities of thought. So even to have an intentional structure can be problematic, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So this is Nilanjan.
Hey, Nilanjan.
Hi. So I actually wanted to ask you about the Dharmottara picture, which I did not fully, like your interpretation of Dharmottara, which I did not fully understand. So I was thinking that, at least on the very textbooky way of understanding Dharmottara, he distinguishes between the kind of presented content of perception and the actionable content of perception. And then the actionable bit has to do with the way conceptual construction works on the akara that is presented in perception. And importantly, the actionable content is grounded in the presented content and the background vasanas. At least that's the picture that he presents in the Apoha text.
That's right. That's right.
So in that sense, like there is here, it does seem like he does talk about various kind of action-based conceptions of knowledge events and so on. But at the same time, when it comes to the real explanatory, like the explanation of how action comes about, like it's kind of a clearly bottom-up picture where it's like the presented akara, Apoha working on it, and that generates the actionable content.
Absolutely.
So I'm not sure about like how close the connection between action.
No, Nilanjan, absolutely. In fact, I think this is the sense in which I was taking it later, where I just too quickly characterized Dharmottara still to be committed to an episodic present-based system, right? There's a way in which the explanations of mental life track moment to moment and are built up out of these causal links, moment to moment. What I meant, so this is very helpful. So what I mean is that along with the fact that the actionable content is grounded in a simpler presentational moment, is that when you're describing so much of something as presentational, it entails, if we're talking about something that is epistemically salient, this actionable moment. You can't stop your description of perception with just with like the grahya, right? Or with just like an initial presentation. It becomes a richer now context that is going to have to terminate in the determination of that initial presentation, and that determination is linked to like this affordance-like characterization of the content, or something that is linked up to an action. That you need this fuller description. Is my sense of what of the difference it makes to think with action as helping to fix the content that is actually doing the work. But it is absolutely true that does not entail, right? That that there is not an initial presentation, or that or none of the grounding links are vitiated thereby. But at the same time, for Dharmottara at least, I take it that to describe something as perceived fully would require that the initial content entail this determined content, and that pairwise characterization is really the fuller picture. And now I don't know Dharmakirti well enough. I'm sure, I mean, like my experience with Dharmakirti is every time I think he hasn't said something, like some Blumen chapter on inference will have a comment where maybe he has this structure, but it feels to me like this is coming from taking seriously this ability for Artha Kriya to function in these two ways as a criterion for causality. So you've got this, you want to provide a causal account of how these procedures are built up out of simpler inputs, and at the same time you want to think about the individuative, the constraints are provided by the actionable, forward-looking concern with successful action in a social world. There's got to be some way to align them, and in Dharmottara's picture, whether successful or not, I feel like that's what's happening. That we're getting a sense of how to put these together with these two kinds of directions of individuating content. I know that's a very rough picture, but that's what I'm thinking.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Nilanjan. Also, Nilanjan, very quickly, when is your book coming out? Let's have another conference just to celebrate that.
Can you hear me? Yeah, just a sort of. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Just wanted to ask you about whether there is an explanatory gap here between phenomenal consciousness of a percept and its non-conceptual content, because that kind of question arises here, because there is the causal link between an actionable percept and its actual moment of perception is often determined by either a kind of phenomenal consciousness that gives it a shape, an akara, or alters it, significantly in a manner that the actionable content will only become a post facto actionable content. So therefore, there seems to be somewhere a kind of a qualia-like situation where there is an explanatory gap between the phenomenal content and what you call as an actionable content. I don't know whether Dharmottara actually deals with this problem or not, which is a kind of a contemporary problem I'm bringing into your notice. But if you sort of comment about the non-conceptual content, the possibility of having non-conceptual content, probably that would help us in understanding it in a more contemporary way.
That's really interesting. I mean, and again, I invite everyone on the table to jump in, but there is a generation of Buddhists later that, like Janendra Buddhi and company, and I think this is already, they're drawing on resources in Prajnakara Gupta, where there are Buddhist ways of asking about. So there are Buddhist ways of resisting the idea that we could pull apart phenomenality from intentional structure. And then there are also Buddhist ways of asking which, if any, is prior like is what is doing the grounding work. And I haven't thought through the link between that debate and the idea about the structure being provided by action, or by the forward-looking concern with action. I need to think about that to know what I would say. But there are debates about intentionality and phenomenality. So that's there. And then we could ask whether how what I'm calling the actionable structure. So what I don't, there is a way in Prajnakaragupta by of generalizing in the following way, that any distinction is going to be related to the resources of conceptuality, which are going to be related to the resources, the situating agents in action spaces, right? That the space of reasons is linked to the space of transaction, so our social embedded life as agents, and that might be a way to go. And then to ask ourselves whether how we would like to think about how we would like to relate the notion of qualia in contemporary debates of many notions of qualia, and then the notion of phenomenal presence or or just consciousness, self-consciousness in some of these Buddhist thinkers, and what that space would look like. But one of the root ideas would be the idea of distinction. I don't know that you can even have a notion of qualia, individuate a notion of qualia without the help of something like a distinction. But this is great. That's a great question. Thank you. I don't know why my screen. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I wish I was there in person. This is what a fantastic gathering.
Oh no, I just said yes because Sonam asked a question. Sonam asked whether we can hear it. Thank you. Anyone else?
So thank you so much.
Thank you everyone, and yeah, I wish everyone very well and wonderful conversations.
I would like to thank Professor Nair and Dr. Kachu for his good presentations. And of course, I would also like to thank all the participants who have contributed to the discussion and made the dialogue richer. So I am thanking Professor Nair and Dr. Kachu for the beautiful presentations. And I would also like to thank all the participants who have contributed to the discussion on these subject matters. And I certainly believe that it has been quite enriching and given us a lot of opportunity to think and learn from the conversations. Thank you. Thank you all.